Mr. Meek will not be with us this morning because he has a brand new granddaughter, 6 pounds and some, is not yet named, but he's got lots of grandfather duties this morning and today, and a couple are running late, but we will go ahead and begin. And the first item is to adopt the minutes of the consent calendar. Have a motion and a second? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor of adopting the consent calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. And the motion carries. Now I would like to turn the instruction portion of the meeting over to Ms. Morrison Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't think we have any visitors today. I didn't get any. Okay, so we will go right into section 2.02, multi-tiered systems of support. And I would like to turn that over to the presenter, Jeff McCoy, if Dr. Royster does not have any comments. Okay?
No. Go right ahead, Mr. McCoy.
Mr. McCoy.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Some of this slide you'll see today is going to look a little familiar because we hit it briefly in the board workshop we did on test data. But this is a little bit more comprehensive overview of the multi-tiered systems of support that we have really been implementing for the last really 3 years. We are still in the course of implementing that across K through 12. But it is a fairly large implementation. On Track is very much tied to this, as well as the GC Source and EWRS that we will talk about. So this is a multi-department initiative that crosses both the academics department and the research department. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward. So just at a very basic, as a reminder, we have talked about it before, what it is, but it is a framework. This is the definition our principal committee came up with, our district committee came up with. We do have a steering committee, if you will, that leads this initiative that's made up of school people and district people. But it's a framework for utilizing evidence-based and data-driven student-centered practices to advance the academic, behavior, and social-emotional learning of all students. So if you see, again, the MTSS, while a lot of people assume it's just academic related, it's really not. We really focus on all aspects of the child, believing philosophically in Greenville County that we really can't educate the child until their basic needs are met, both academically but also socio-emotionally. And so, as you know, and I apologize, I hope you could read that better on the back screen, I guess. The best MTSS models do focus on the whole child. We did a lot of research of this across the country. And those just kind of quick scenarios are things we encounter every day in our classroom. A student who is acting out of class because her parents may be going through a divorce, and so she's struggling at home. How can we intervene to help make that child's life a little easier, and ultimately then intervene with them academically? Or a child who struggles in math. They fail the first 9 weeks and they get discouraged because they don't feel like they can catch back up, and they just kind of quit working. So that course performance, how do we motivate them? And then attendance. As you know, in the past, we've got a lot of hardship cases, students who have to work for various reasons. They've got family situations that require them to work, and unfortunately sometimes school takes a back seat, obviously, to providing for a family and making sure they have a place to live and food to eat. And so how do we, again, help those students who may, with innovative solutions, help those students who may already miss 25 days of high school and now they can't earn credit towards graduation because they missed those days. And so again, the whole point is that we're intervening not just an academic with the children, but how do we meet their basic social-emotional needs to help them learn academically. While this list is not exclusive in any way, we do focus on that whole child approach, and these are some areas that we focus on with the MTSS, GC Source, On Track initiative, and some of the things we've got going on. Again, it's not exhaustive, but under that mental health piece, that social-emotional intervention that we do in our schools, and also some outside services as well. Substance abuse counseling, for example, we don't necessarily do that in school, but we have agencies we refer to, and that students can, and families can be referred to if they're struggling with that. On the health side, you, of course, know that we've got in those 3 on-track schools, we actually have a medical component of that grant where the kids can actually receive some basic medical services in-house. And some of those are being preventative to hopefully prevent things like being out of school. And then the Healthy Lunch Initiative, of course, helps and benefits all of our children across the district. Some of the family supports, social workers, obviously, we do employ some of those ourselves. We've got some of those outside agencies that also work with our students with social work. The backpack programs, those don't happen in every school necessarily, but across the district, they do happen at various schools where, whether it be PTA, SIC, or school initiates food that they pack in a backpack for the students over the weekend so that students and families have something to eat that may be struggling financially. And you can kind of see some of those other things there. I'll hit upon the parent resource centers. We are really trying to help how parents help their children at home. So there's parent resource centers where they can check out resources and also get some education on things like how to help your child if they're struggling as a reader. What kind of strategies can you use at home with your children? ELL, as you know, that growing population is huge in our district. So how do we support our English learners' families? The academic supports you're a little bit more familiar with probably. Again, the SPED supports we have in place across the district, the ELL supports, our on-track grant, and mentors and child advocates that we're consistently increasing to make sure that every child has someone they feel safe going to in the building to work with. And then attendance interventions, of course, social workers. We have a dropout preventionist, Mr. Perry, of course, and then again our on-track initiative. So on-track kind of spans all of these things we just talked about. So you have seen this graphic in the board workshop, so it's not anything necessarily new. Again, just as a reminder, though, the left side of that, that's rhombus. The left side of that rhombus is for the more intervention side. The right side is more for the advancement of students, and so we want to focus on both. You're going to hear with our MTSS framework, that's one of the reasons we made this into a rhombus versus a one triangle that was going up, is that it didn't address the advanced students. And we want to, and we're being focused on that the last 2 years in Greenville County, is really how do we work with those advanced students to make sure they stay on an advanced track. It's important to remediate students, but it's also critically important to also make sure our advanced students are moving forward as well in our classrooms. So you can imagine that as you move to the left or the right, there's different places sometimes students do go. We do believe at the bottom that classroom teachers are responsible for that whole gamut of students they have in their classroom. They are the ones that are providing intervention to our students, both remediation and acceleration. But once you get into that orange and blue and purple and red, some of those students may be going out for services in addition to what the teacher's doing in the classroom. So those could look like ELL supports for our English learners. That could be special education. That could be gifted and talented pull-out that they're going to. That could be reading interventionists or math interventionists on that left-hand side again, if they're in intervention or if they're in remediation. So lots of different supports that students are maybe involved in. The instructional protocol, I'm just going to hit and remind you again because this is one of our critical components of our instructional process. We rolled that out, or rolling that out this year. You may see that on posters as you walk into schools. Some schools have chosen to roll it out this year. We really gave principals permission to really just work with us this year and really understand this instructional protocol before they roll it out to their faculty and staff. This will form the basis for instruction. I know that's hard to read on here, but I gave you a copy of it, I believe, in the workshop if you took it all. You've got a laminated copy of this. And so, again, looking at those questions, you'll see the questions that we ask teachers to look at when they're planning their lessons really encompasses the whole child, from culture to environment to ultimately the instructional delivery, which is what we obviously focus in the academics department. That back side of the instructional protocol on the right-hand side here is focused on unit planning. Not all teachers may need this as a guide. Some may be very adept at this, but if a teacher is struggling or you've got brand new teachers who are really new to the profession and really don't know how maybe to build a unit plan, this process would help them kind of through that. The instructional protocol I think I may have mentioned this, but it did take about 3 years to develop. This is the year we're rolling it out, but 3 years prior, made up of teachers, principals, district level people. So there's a lot of input on this and what it was going to look like. Much of it did follow the state process for the new evaluation system as well. So we took into consideration all those national models as well as state models when we were building our instructional protocol. So looking at that triangle again, if you look at that triangle, we've got what we call Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And so individually what that Tier 1 is going to look like, that is really what you should see when you walk into a classroom today. You should hopefully see a positive climate environment. You should hopefully see evidence of a positive behavior system. How does the teacher interact with the students, and how does she or he do discipline in their classroom? Do you see evidence of procedures and processes in place? And then a school-wide standards-based core instruction. So basically the classroom instruction that's happening. You want that to be standards-based. You hope the kids are engaged. You want to look for that engagement. And you also critically want to look for that differentiation of instruction. How does the teacher differentiate instruction for those students who are at the very lowest levels and at the very highest levels? And we know in a classroom you're going to have low, medium, high in every classroom. That's just the nature of what we do. And so how does the teacher differentiate for that kid struggling versus that kid that's already on an advanced track and moving on to the next content? And so you want to look for that when you're in the classroom. The Tier 2, and again, this would be the students who are just struggling a little bit. They're not grasping that concept. It could be a concept, or they could be, ideally, with that, again, that rhombus, is the kids are not moving laterally and staying in those areas. Hopefully they're moving into Tier 1 and then moving back to Tier 1. The idea is that we are remediating them and they're getting the content and moving back into core instruction. And so Tier 2 is really that clearly defined intervention program. Again, that could be as simple as the teacher intervening with the child. I need to see you after school, or I'm going to work with you at lunch, or I'm going to work with you at power hour. Or it could be, in some cases, if they felt like it was severe enough, they could move that child out to an intervention program, like reading intervention or math intervention. Tier 3, this is where we would have fewer kids in this category. But these are the students, again, that would need some more intensive intervention. So the teacher, again, is intervening in the classroom. They are trying to differentiate the instruction, trying to remediate the student. But at the end of the day, they're going to be going out to some sort of probably other special service. They may be going out to special education. They may be going out to ESOL if they're an ELL learner. Or they may be going out to math intervention, reading intervention. So it really depends on the child and what the needs are as to where and if they need additional supports. But at this level, most of those students would need some additional support outside the classroom of what the classroom teacher could provide. And so it's going to be a joint effort between classroom teacher and the intervention at that point in time. So how do we identify those students who are in need of intervention? That's a critical component. We want to make sure we're not guessing there. We want to make sure we've got data. That's the whole point of that MTSS framework. We've got data to drive the instructions we're making about our students. And there's a lot of data available to us in Greenville County Schools. On Track was really that grant, if you remember. On Track was with the original grant was with the 3 middle schools that we have in our county. And we have now since expanded On Track to really roll out to all schools in some capacity. And so it's a collaborative problem-solving team that focuses on keeping students on track for graduation utilizing the EWRS, which is our early warning response system. I'm going to show you some screenshots of that, and intervention connection tools. So it's not just identifying and saying, Mr. Webb needs additional intervention. It's actually tracking those. What are we going to do? How are we going to track those? And we're going to circle back around in 2 weeks to make sure that that has been done, and is it successful for him? And so this tool has been incredibly valuable for us for tracking that kind of stuff, that we didn't have to do it in kind of a hodgepodge manner. Now everything's in one system. I can pull that up right now from my office on any child in the district and look and see what we're doing. So the On Track does operate within that MTSS framework, that rhombus, if you remember from looking back there. That's really what On Track is working within. That's how we identify the supports for students. Are they Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 instruction? We assume, and everybody's getting Tier 1 instruction. Everybody's getting core instruction in our district. They may also, though, be getting Tier 2 intervention or Tier 3 intervention, depending upon what they need. Both sides, again, advance or remediation. And so that early warning response system, I talked about the ABCs early on. It provides that real-time data to administrators and our teams to intervene with students based on the critical attendance, behavior, and course performance, which is what the ABC stands for. I think this is very revolutionary, I think, for our district to, again, consider the whole child piece of this. When I was teaching 10, 12 years ago, when we were working and intervening with students, it was primarily academic intervention. We were looking at why a student wasn't performing. We weren't necessarily digging down into the root causes of why they were not performing. And so this system really allows us to do that. And part of that back then was just we didn't have the data accessibility that we have now to really be able to look at some of those whole child indicators. And so I think I showed this graphic to you before, but the whole point of the EWRS, the On-Track Initiative, the MTSS, is really to get to the root cause analysis of why a child is not performing. So if we see the symptoms of outward manifestation of the problem, what do we see? A lot of times we'll see a child act out. And there's a reason for that most of the time. There's a reason why they're acting out, particularly if that behavior's changed from what it used to be. And so working with our administrators to really kind of dig down into why is that child's behavior all of a sudden changed? They had no disciplinary issues up until this point, and all of a sudden now we've suspended them for 6 days already. What's going on? And so really digging down to that root surface cause. And there's a million of reasons what the root cause can be, but some of the most common ones that we have is sometimes it's homelessness. A child's family's income changes immediately, and that child's thrown into turmoil, and as a result, they're acting out in class, or they're not attending class, and so homelessness can cause that. If they're being abused at home, or trauma that's happened, or a death in the family, all of those are root causes, and while we can't fix those things necessarily, all those things are things we can't fix, we can provide supports and help to the students. And we can provide counseling for the students in those areas, or we can make sure they get the help or the abuse stops or whatever that happens to be. So that's really where we're focused with this EWRS and On-Track system. So this is what it would look like in the system. I know it's a little bit small there, but you can see I kind of put over here the overall here on here, for example. So what you see at the top there is students who are off track. This is one of our schools, one of our on-track schools, but students who may be off track in A, B, or C. And so it looks like a large number, but there's going to be students who are off track in one of those in many cases. And that means maybe they crossed over the attendance threshold. So they're kind of, again, that's good for us to know, though, to say, oh, we need to kind of monitor that and look at that child and see. We don't want them to delve into having other indicators against them. So let's really look at that and see what's going on there with their attendance, why they're struggling. The one that you will find interventions for, though, when you look at is the 16 that you see on the right-hand column there. Those are students in this school that are off target in A, B, and C. So they've got attendance issues, they've got behavior issues, and they've got course performance issues. And those are a lot of times interconnected. If they're having some major discipline problems, they may maybe be suspended from school, and as a result, of course, course performance is suffering. And so those are the kids that you would be able, if I drilled down, which I did, if I drilled down those 16, that's where I'm finding interventions. Now, a lot of times there's interventions for the other students as well, but they wouldn't have interventions for every category necessarily because they're only struggling in one category of the 514 there. The 16, though, those are the students we're most concerned about. They've got some major issues that we've got to kind of delve into to figure out what's going on with them. So you can kind of see what it looks like: attendance, behavior, course performance. You see the orange, the yellow, green, orange, and red. Those are just a real quick way for teachers to be able to pop in the system and see very quickly color-coded who are my kids that are really the most struggling. While this does happen at a school team, a lot of times where this should be happening, particularly at the middle school and high school, is in their PLC or their professional learning communities. They should be talking about those students as it relates to that academic performance. And so in the professional learning communities, that's where the teacher should be having conversations about a student in there. And again, in the past, it may be a little bit more fluid because they didn't have a lot of hard data, but now we've got very hard data to say, well, they're not performing in the class because they've missed 14 days of school already. So we need to get an intervention in place with the parents to figure out why they're missing so much school because it's impacting their performance in the course. So that is an incredibly valuable tool for our schools to be able to really focus in on how to provide interventions for our students, grounded in data. And by the way, I should say that all the data that comes in here is based on all the types of data we have available. So state test scores, a lot of our district data that we're providing, whether it be T21 benchmarks, Fontainebleau data, all that data that Jason can possibly squeeze into that system he's doing so that it gives the most accurate picture. It does also feed from Power School, so that grades, when you look at course performance, that is live, for the most part, live data. So it's not 9-week-old data. It's actually data that, as the teachers grade tests and update grade books, that's being fed into the system so that we have live data on our students, which is critical. This is just what an intervention connection looks like. So for John Smith here, student John Smith, and this is a real student. We just changed the name, obviously, to protect. But this is a student, for example, that you can see is on really kind of in B and C is kind of on, I wouldn't say in trouble, but we're watching them because in attendance they're okay. But in B and C and the behavior and the course performance, they're struggling a little bit. And you can see down at the bottom, these are all the interventions that have been put in place. And I know it's hard to see on there, but you can't necessarily see, but all those things are different meeting dates. And so again, the critical point in this is we meet together as a team, we come up with the intervention, and then what we do is we follow back up with that intervention. So a month later, once those interventions are in place. So what the structure looks like is a consistent schedule for meeting for our students, that EWRS team. That quarterly school-wide review of EWRS data. Now, again, our teachers and our PLCs are reviewing that data much more regularly. They may be reviewing it weekly in their team meetings or twice a month reviewing that data in their meetings because it can change that quickly. The regular review of the early warning response systems and the interventions, and really looking at our established norms that we have. And if you were to pop in one of those meetings, you would see a very kind of strict kind of schedule that they follow or norm that they follow to get through those meetings. It's a lot of students, ultimately. So who's involved in that? Typically, again, in a lot of our on-track schools, we would have administrators in those meetings. We would have counselors in those meetings, not all of them, but a representative. We may have school psychologists in that meeting. You would have teacher representation in that meeting, and then typically social workers as well would be in that meeting. So again, in the on-track, you've got a little bit, and you may have some other additional people from on-track because you're talking about some other services like the medical piece that we may not have in all of our schools. So we ask our student, when the teams are looking at a student, we ask them to follow that problem-solving process. What is the issue? So if we've got a child, again, who's missing a ton of school, why is that? A lot of times, to be honest with you, the school team they don't get through this whole process. A lot of times they'll get to a certain step and say, we got to find more data. We got to figure out more data for this child. We don't have everything we need to make a diagnosis of why this child's missing so much school. And so that may be homework for its person. That may be some team members' homework to go out and find additional data to bring back to the team. A lot of times with problem solving, you can't get through the whole process the first time because data's missing or you need data, additional data, more questions arise. And so one of the things you'll see is a very student-centered discussion. What do we see? And we want that grounded in evidence. They would present the early warning response data to the team, usually on the Promethean board where everybody can see it, and then they would review and share the evidence. Again, it's not what I feel or I think. It's more evidence-based. This is how this child performed or has been performing over time. And then looking at, again, the whole point, this is getting to the analysis of why is this occurring. What is the root cause analysis of why this is occurring? And then throughout that meeting, they would go through the EWRS. Again, they're going to look at attendance, behavior, course performance. There's just a couple of things. The course performance includes a lot of different things. That's just a couple of things that we've included in there. The live grades, the fast bridge, which is 5K in first grade, test data that ranges from, again, K-12, and then link the indicators to the data-driven decision making. So here's the evidence we have. Here's the intervention we're going to put in place based on that evidence that we have. We're going to try this intervention. Jason and his team has done a great job of really putting some interventions in the system already that they can choose from. But of course, those are not exhaustive. I mean, you can come up with your own interventions, of course, and not every situation is going to have an intervention in the system that you could apply to it. But it's a place to start for schools who may struggle with what do we do to intervene with this child. And then step 3, again, is that implementing of it. So we match the intervention to the student's needs, and then we assign an advocate to that child. So again, so we have someone who can follow up with that child to kind of say, how are you progressing? How are you working on this? Or if it's, again, counseling services, we may need to get the child. But somebody that we can assign that child as an advocate to them. The selecting a start date and follow-up date is critical. Again, you don't want to just come up with all these interventions and then go out there and we lose sight of, did they work, did they not work, is the child making progress? And so that follow-up date is critical. Will be chosen based on the intervention, how long it takes to put that in place. And then you can just kind of see, again, the advocate roles and responsibilities. The advocate should be someone at the school level, a site-based person, who communicates with the students and or parents and guardians are critical in this process as well. They would communicate with the interventionist to make sure that intervention is being put in place. And then they would follow up and gather the evidence and the data of whether that intervention is actually working or not. And then they would report on that student progress to the team. And so this is where we may change a little bit as far as looking at the intervention, whether it worked or not, and what our next steps might be. So that problem-solving discussion, we do, if the principal is not present, they would communicate that meeting outcome to the principal. A lot of times the principals are present for that. And then they would coordinate A-team meetings if necessary. And again, the A-team piece, just if a child, we've tried multiple interventions, they're not working, maybe we need to consider this child for special education services, and then we kick off that A-team process for that. Once they have implemented the intervention, so we've implemented an intervention for X amount of time, a couple of weeks or whatever that happens to be, there's several things that can happen. Number one, we may find that progress is evident, which is what we hope to happen. We found the child has made progress, they've improved, and so there's two things we would make a decision on at that point in time. We would either continue that intervention or we would phase it out. In some cases, kids don't need to continue that intervention because they've gotten over that hurdle of whatever it was and they're good to go. Other times that intervention needs to continue. Again, for example, counseling services. Maybe we don't feel like the intervention is working, but we want to continue those counseling services to make sure the child has what they need. Or we may find that progress was not evident. We come back after several weeks and we find out the progress was not made with the child. So we would either at that point modify the intervention, look in again, consult the intervention connection, look for some other interventions that might work, or we would come up with a new intervention altogether. And again, that could be from the system, or that could be one that we come up with as a team. Or for some reason, and this would happen rarely, but for some reason the intervention was not implemented. And at that point in time, though, we would delve into why it was not implemented. If it was a staff issue and the person just said, oh, I forgot about that, I just didn't get that implemented this last couple of weeks, that would be a staff issue. We would refer to the administrator to kind of follow up with the importance of why these interventions are so critical for students. Or we would eliminate the barrier. Again, maybe we've implemented an intervention for 3 weeks and the child was gone for 2 of those weeks. That's a barrier. We can't implement an intervention if the child's not there. So we would work to eliminate that barrier, usually with a parent conference, to try to figure out why, again, we're missing 2 weeks of school. And so the MTSS implementation schedule, so we kind of talked about what it looks like, what's happening in our schools. So what does it look like rolled out across the board? There are components of this rolled out across every school. All schools have access to GCS source. All schools have access to EWRS and are using it to varying degrees. And so the implementation timeline, again, now this started a couple years ago in 15-16 with the On Track United Way grant that we had. And you can see the schools listed there. In 17 and 18, we continued that on-track work, but we also brought on what we call on-track GCS schools, and you can kind of see which schools those were there. It wasn't a ton of schools because it does take a significant amount of work and training for our staff to do that, so we want to make sure this training is as solid as possible, and we want to make sure we are able to dedicate the resources to the schools to implement this properly. So 18-19, so 17-18 obviously is this school year. 18-19, we will have the 10 schools that you saw in 17-18. We will continue to work with those 10 schools. Obviously, the grant continues at the 3 middle schools. We'll continue to work with the on-track schools that we've identified from this year, and we will also pull on 35 additional schools next year. And then finally, in 19-20, very similar model, continue to work with the grant schools. We will continue to support and monitor the 45 schools that had already been trained, and we will bring on the remaining 35 schools to brief them in this entire process. Now again, schools have varying degrees that's already going on of things they've implemented, but this process as far as how we train and push out to all schools, this is the implementation schedule based on our staff's time and schedule and what we feel like we can do with fidelity of this process. The 18-19, just if you're interested, the 18-19 middle school, schools rather, there's our elementary, middle, and high schools who would be next year's schools. And then finally the 19-20 schools moving forward as far as who those would be. Again, when we're working with principals and we're working with principals and instructional coaches, a lot of this work is embedded in those meetings. So again, all schools are getting parts of this. All schools are getting a lot of these strategies in those meetings, but this is the actual full kind of MTSS framework as we roll it out to all schools at a very high level. I mentioned this briefly, but just parent involvement. We don't want to kind of downplay that side of it. The parent involvement is key in this process. Parents should be a part of this from step one, because really what we can do at school is, and we do a lot of interventions at school, But those interventions can't stop at school. Again, if we're talking about attendance issues, we can only do so much to get a child to school. The parent has to be involved in that process of helping get the child to school. And so we believe that there's a fundamental value of this MTSS system, if you will, that we believe parents have to be at the center of this process to help their child succeed in school. And so we try very hard to make sure they're involved from very much day one of your child struggling. Here's some interventions we want to put in place. How can you help us at home? And we'll make sure that we provide them the supports at school for that.
As we transition to the questions, we simply want to kind of summarize all this because that's a whole lot of information.
Yeah.
But really the summary to it, I think, is this. It's our best effort to individually address every student and help to remove any barriers they have on an individual basis to being as successful as they can possibly be in school. And if we can continue to remove those barriers, support those students, and move them as individuals within the system, we'll obviously move grade levels, we'll move schools, we'll move the system as a whole. So we think this offers our best path forward for ensuring that we create students and graduates who are college and career ready by moving them as best we possibly can on an individual basis and removing those barriers that we know quite often exist outside the classroom, but by helping to engage those people that can assist with those things. So we felt like this was an important part of the overall discussion regarding not just achievement test scores, but how we're working to move students forward within the system. And now I think Mr. McCoy and those others present who have a role in this are available to take any questions you might have.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mr. McCoy and Dr. Royster. I have so far one speaker, Michelle Carwile.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm glad to see that you're looking at the whole child. But I want to know, is there a staff person or who is the lead on this? Because, you know, teachers already say they got too much to do, all this other stuff to do, and you're rolling out a lot of things with rolling out the Mastery Connect and this. Tell me, who's going to be the lead?
Are you talking about the school level lead?
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that you're going to have a team, but who's going to be the lead to make sure that they are looking at this data on, is it a daily, a weekly, a monthly basis? How?
The EWRS teams, the school-wide teams only meet quarterly typically. Now, what I will say, and that's usually led by, and there's a lot of people that could lead that team, but a lot of times the administrators would take lead of that team because it's a school-wide initiative. But now what I would say is that when you're looking individually at professional learning communities that you have set up in your schools, those professional learning communities, yes, a lot of times they're looking at this data weekly. So it's not a monthly or a quarterly process for them because, again, those are the kids they're teaching right now, and quarterly is a little too long, 9 weeks to wait and look at that data.
Right.
And we would not, and we try to help teachers understand that this is not one more thing. This is, if you're struggling with a child who is not performing in class, if you can solve the root problem of why that child's not succeeding in class, you ultimately are going to save yourself a lot of time and energy in the long run with that.
But I heard you say something about training for the system. Now, I
Yes.
know that you just rolled out the Mastery Connect, and when I was in one of the town hall meetings, they was talking about the professional development not being up to par with that, and you rolling out this, and
Well, we do.
how does this connect?
So the Mastery Connect piece, that was a train-the-trainer model, just similar to what this is. Jason has a staff member on staff, Jennifer Driscoll, who goes out and works with schools on training them on the GCS source system. Now, what I would say to that is that system is fairly easy for teachers to navigate, and you saw a screenshot of that. So they have access to their students only, so it's not a cumbersome hour, 2 hour, 3 hour training. What Jennifer goes in and does with our EWRS teams is goes in and trains them on that process of how to actually look and analyze the data to actually make decisions for students.
So is there going to be a lead person at the school that does all of this, that alerts them? Because, I mean, with you looking at it quarterly, you need,
Yes,
is
would
that
be.
going to be a staff position or?
It would be an
is
additional.
somebody?
Yes, it would be a staff position that exists, whether that be an administrator. A lot of times it could be teacher representatives who are bringing, obviously we need the teacher voice at that table, and teachers want to be involved in that process because it is their students on that process. So yes, there will be both teacher representation. The ones I have sat in on so far to date, the administrator has actually led those, either assistant principal or principal.
So right now, this multi-tier system is going to only be in the schools that I see the implementation plan. So it's not going to be in all schools right now?
There's components of it in all schools. That framework you saw with the triangle and the interventions that have rolled out, that part is in all schools. All schools have an understanding of what multi-tiered system of supports look like. Every school does not have, as of yet, the EWRS teams rolling necessarily like they're rolling in the on-track schools and that implementation schedule we showed you.
Okay. That's all for right now, but
Okay.
I might have some more. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Wells?
Thank you, and I apologize for being late. With this work that we're doing, I know we implemented this and it was part of a research project, kind of implementing this whole multi-tiered system. What does the data look like coming out of what we've done so far?
I'm not sure. You mean?
Well, and the idea was that if we put in this whole system of supports, and that's what we use to focus, that we're by doing so, we're going to see increased academic achievement,
yes,
more success with our students. And I remember, I think it was was it Furman's Riley Institute that they were actually collecting data and tracking
Correct.
data. Do we have any of that yet to know what?
We'll get it this month in January. All of the sub-grantees will get it this month.
Okay.
But we already have some preliminary data for the past 2 years.
Okay. Could you? I mean, is it?
Summarize
Can I put you on the
preliminary
spot
data,
and yeah.
All 4 schools that have been involved have seen success. That's been measured multiple ways. I can tell you that one of the middle schools that's seen the most success across the board, across A, B's, and C's, in all 3 of those areas, they've seen double-digit percentage point increases in attendance, decreases in behavior referrals, and increases in achievement.
Okay.
Now, that's our local return on track. Now, there's all kind of national research on multi-tiered systems of support. That's
Right.
what caused us to move down that path initially.
Right. Well, and that was what was really exciting about being able to work with all these partners with this grant to look at what could we do here. So what the additional resources that are being utilized in those schools, and then how that would translate to these schools that we're bringing onto the system. What is the different? What additional roles, responsibilities are there coming with this use of GCS and the ABCs that we're going to have to figure out how to replicate beyond what we have? Because we have extra resources right now at those schools with
Correct.
the pilot, right?
Correct.
Yeah, the things that will have to be determined down the road, and let me back up just a little bit. This doesn't become one more thing, this becomes the thing.
Right.
Because it identifies students, where they're struggling, and the areas in which we need to give them assistance moving forward. We already have some of that assistance in place throughout the district in very limited ways. We have a certain number of social workers. We have one in every Title I school. We have, I think, 5 or 6 additional social workers beyond that. We have a number of attendance people. We have some folks like that. But as we see benefit coming out of On Track, then part of the analysis of On Track needs to be all of those additional resources provided through the On Track initiative, what of those are most directly related to the improvements we've seen, and how might we go back now to other schools or go out to other schools and put forth similar programs, whether they're a school with, and a lot of this obviously correlates with the poverty rate of the school, because the higher the poverty rate, the greater the barriers and obstacles. But even schools with very low poverty rates have students that have barriers and obstacles to learning. So what resources will be necessary to completely carry out the same type of program at all of our schools that we have in the on-track schools, scaled to the level of issues they have in the school? That's a question we've not yet answered. And I think you've heard us talk about that a couple of times, particularly during last year during the budget preparation, of things that we're looking at down the road. What are the findings from on-track, and what implications might it have for providing services to students that we're not currently providing? And how might we engage other partners in providing some of those services at little to no cost to us? Because some of the services we get in on-track, they're not really coming from us, they're coming from other providers.
Right, right. And then, again, that was part of that whole collaborative partnership. So the work that's being done in terms of the research, is it also looking at that? So looking at, here's the achievement, we've seen progress, but then trying to dig into what that's related to? Because what we've done is put a lot of interventions in place. We've added a lot of support. Are they evaluating which support mechanisms are really giving us that increase?
They are. The first year and a half they did it, and they continue doing an implementation impact study across each site, and now they've turned their attention this past year, because they have outcome data, to looking at strictly impact, an impact study and an impact design. So we should receive the information this month from Riley, which details answers to questions that you asked.
Okay. So when we're rolling out the MTSS to other schools, are we, knowing that they don't have all those same services, wraparound services and those kinds of things, when we're showing them, okay, here's GC Source and here's how you can use it, are we doing some kind of a GCS Source Lite or MTSS Lite so that they...
Yeah, I mean, yes. To answer your question, all of those services that we offer on track can't be replicated, as Dr. Royster said, in every school. Medical is a great example of that. Right. However, a lot of those services can be and are already being replicated. For example, on the academic side, we have the PEP coaches in place at those on-track schools. Every school has an instructional coach. And so what we do in those meetings is training the instructional coach. How do you help a teacher who is struggling? You know, if it's a teacher issue, how do you help that teacher through coaching cycles, which is what the PEP coaches do on-site, kind of, while it's helping the students indirectly, they're helping the teacher become better at their craft, so, and in turn it helps the students perform better. So yeah, so we are, the attendance piece can be across the school. Those interventions Jason puts in place on the Intervention Connection for attendance, any school can provide those interventions to students. Behavior interventions, a lot of that's just training teachers on, if a child's having a anger management issue, how do you de-escalate instead of escalate? So, I mean, those types of interventions, every school across the district can certainly, implement. What we couldn't implement across the district right now, of course, is some of the medical interventions and some of the extra social work services, mental health services that may be happening on track-wise.
Well, and Jeff mentioned mental health, and you all recall, I don't want to use the wrong number, but I believe we've got now 79 mental health counselors in our schools. Not school counselors, but counselors from mental health. So they have those resources available. But a lot of this is identifying on the front end with immediacy problems that we have tended to find over time in looking back.
Right.
So hopefully by identifying them more quickly, the intervention can be less deep and we can more effectively use the resources that we do have already, and then look beyond that to expanding resources. The mention about health issues, that's a big issue with students in chronic absenteeism, but as this information is provided back to the healthcare providers that are providing those support services now, and they see a value and a return to them, we hope that will be impetus for them to expand their offerings into other school settings. Again, using those kind of the same way we do nurse assignments now, we do it based on critical incidents. Every school has a nurse, but if they have a certain level of critical incidents in that school related to students on medication, medical needs, we may make some additional assignment based on that. But we hope that they will see the benefit in that to their organization and to furtherance of their mission and begin to offer expansions of those services. Okay. So all of that is down the road, but it's beginning now to come together in a picture that we can share with people and also use to inform our own budget process, if not for this budget cycle, but certainly for the hard to imagine we're saying FY20 budget, because we're beginning to enter the FY19 budget cycle.
So, a little more detailed question then. I guess, to your point, we're also using this GC source data so that we can look at student course performance as it relates to a teacher. So we're pulling that data, or someone, I guess. Is that also something that you're trying to teach the local school leaders? How do you pull GC source data and look for trends
Yes.
in grade performance, et cetera?
Yeah, so we would look at the obviously the state assessment data, but that's where really TE21 comes and Mastery Connect comes heavily into play. Is we're not waiting for a full year to realize, or multiple years to realize, teacher X is really struggling teaching this fractions unit to students who are overall underperforming when it comes to that on the test. We're able to intervene right now with that. So the meetings that the principals are having with teachers, and it's not an evaluative meeting. It is not about putting you on an improvement plan for that. It is a coaching and supportive meeting. So I'm going to provide you with a coach or a coaching cycle or whatever it happens to be. I'm going to provide you with the support when it comes for that unit or when it comes to what area you're struggling in to hopefully get you up to mastery level of teaching that content to students.
And then are we doing any, I guess this is a question for Dr. McCrary, are we doing any work where we're looking at the interactions between the ABCs for correlation? So for instance, you might have a student who has attendance issues because they're getting the referrals. So it's not, you don't need attendance interventions, you need,
Right.
so, and in the same way, I mean, are we looking at, I know there's research nationally, which is why we picked the ABCs, which is great, but are we doing our own research on this data that we're collecting to look at the interactions between the ABCs?
We don't and haven't done an empirical study, for example. But with the data we have, we don't necessarily have to. We have a series of dashboards that will show us which. So if I'm a principal at a school, I don't have to wait around for the data. The data comes to me. I go to a particular dashboard. I can see which students are referred. I can sort by any variable on date they were referred, how many days they were in school or out of school suspension, what the most common referral is, who's referring the most students, what the course grades are for those students being referred, who the teachers are who are given specific course grades. So we can look at those type of dashboards. A teacher can, a principal can, and they can see trends that are happening. And as been stated here and what we know, if they're being suspended out of school, their course grades are dropping. Their attendance is a one-to-one correlation with out-of-school suspension.
Okay, so I guess that's the biggest piece of this, is making sure that those leaders in the building, it's a really powerful tool,
Yes.
but you
Right.
have to be able
Yes.
to use it. So the dashboard should help with at least making that information readily available. And then it's the training that you're talking about to get the implementation of it that's going to be the key
Correct.
to making that work.
And that's where the teacher part's so critical to, again, having watched one of those, when initially, like you or I would look at not knowing a child, we would see attendance as a flag. We would jump to the child needs to come to school to more. But to your point, having sat through those before, a lot of times that will be, he was suspended 7 days. So that's, to your point, it's not an attendance issue, that's a behavior issue. Right. And the course performance, and a teacher who's there is looking at grades and saying, the days they were suspended, they hadn't made up that work yet. That's why their grades are all low. And so that immediately, we can put some interventions in place, hopefully to figure out what the behavior issue is. But immediately, we can put interventions in place right there to work with that child to get that work made up. Assign that advocate or that mentor to to stay on that child to get that work made up from when they miss the test or quiz or whatever it happens to be, and hopefully increase those course performance grades. So the teacher's knowledge of students is critical. We can only look at data as it just tells you and I what we look at it, what the numbers say. But we all know when you get down to that level of that meeting, that's when the real kind of conversation comes out, because those teachers know those kids and what's going on.
Well, and it almost seems like it's like we're going to provide special education services for a broader group of children outside of a special education requirement.
It's individualization, yes.
Right.
Yes, individualization.
So I mean, I think it's absolutely the best way to approach it. It's a challenge to figure out how to implement and look at every child and intervene for every child.
What this does, though, if you think back a number of years, teachers who were most effective in their classroom with improving student achievement, they spent a lot of time going back over student assessment, student test, outlining, how many A's, how many B's, how many C's, what questions did they miss? Did 20% of the class miss questions number 6, 7, and 8, which related to how you convert a fraction into a percentage or fraction into a decimal? They spent a huge amount of time doing that. You could go back even 30-something years ago, and principals who were most effectively moving students and schools forward, you might go in a room in their building and they had all these notes stuck up on the wall of where every child was. I can remember going to elementary principal's office, this was way more than 30 years ago, and he had a note on a wall in a conference room, and it was the reading level of every child in that 650 student elementary school. And he knew exactly, as best he could, where every one of them was reading. And what this does is puts all that in an easily, once you learn the system, an easily managed format right on your desktop or your laptop or your computer screen. Now, the intermediate step was that several years ago, a lot of districts had data warehouses. Well, you about had to have a PhD in statistics and technology to know how to maneuver inside that data warehouse. This is a much more easy to use, easy to understand, more manageable system, but it provides almost in a touch, although it takes perhaps more than one, that information that it used to take people that were the best at doing this hours and hours and hours to do. And so it truly moves us toward, to your point, an individualized education plan for every student, as special needs students have had since 1974, whatever year it was, that 94 142 went into effect. But tying their graduation plan to their current performance and how they need to get from their current performance through their graduation plan to get whatever certification, whatever college-bound credit they need, tying all that together where you can real-time see what they're doing and apply interventions as quickly as you can identify there's a need for them. And that's a lot of work, but that's the work we do. And hopefully at the end of this implementation, it will be a greater conservator of time that can then be spent on applying the interventions instead of wondering, well, what do I need to do to get these students back on track or on track?
Yeah, and the course grades part, are we also looking for underperformance? I mean, is there a way to track, is there a way to at least look at if a student's grade performance has slipped versus maybe they're not failing, but it's...
It looks at changing grades. It doesn't just go to failing.
No, it doesn't go to failing. It hopefully there's interventions, and that's the beauty of the system and the process. Hopefully, prior to failing, there's been an intervention when students' scores slip.
So that's what it's looking for.
And those scores aren't buried, or no one person is a gatekeeper. There's no teacher who's a gatekeeper who, prior to an administrator receiving that information, have to wait for a teacher to get it. Same thing moving on up. The accountability is there for teachers, principals, and our assistant superintendents and district level staff have access to it, to the information.
But the only thing teachers have access to is their own data.
That's correct.
Their own students, right? So that's where at high school in particular, to really leverage that data, a teacher that only sees their data doesn't really know how a student, what's happening with the student across other class subjects. So that's why that administrator, that instructional coach or whoever helps parse that data is really important.
Well, and that's where you get into the middle school level and at the high school level, it being a team of teachers coming together. Now, that's most easily accomplished at the middle school level because they're pretty much now all in teams. A little more difficult at the high school level because they begin to diversify so much. They're not in those well-organized teams, but you have to bring multiple teachers to the table. You may find a student that's struggling across the board everywhere, but you may also find one that only struggles in math or only struggles in English language arts.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Excuse me, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. This is great, and I really appreciate you guys providing this information. I know I was on the Community Impact Cabinet at the United Way when the work on track was kind of being pushed out. And the thing that really excited me about it was that it's really hard for community partners to identify ways that they can measurably impact what's happening in the classroom without kind of tripping over the school district to do it. So, when we look at the on-track grant schools, I know we're going to get some data later, which I think will answer this question. But do we feel that model? I mean, part of this was a demonstration project, right? To say, all right, communities and schools, or PEP, or GHS, these are measurable ways that you can be involved in this work. Now that we've done it for a few years, do we feel like that model of the district kind of using data-driven work to guide partners is working? Are you getting from your partners what you had hoped to get, separate from the data that we'll get at some other time?
Right. Well, I'm most actively engaged in the academic side of it, obviously. Jason maybe will speak to the other supports that are in place. But from the academic side, certainly what that allowed us to do is have more coaches in some of those most struggling schools where we may have only had one instructional coach and then my staff that would go and support. They provided additional support. So while we didn't, and I would say it was a great collaborative effort, while we didn't necessarily provide anything differently, what it did allow us to do was ramp up very quickly, which I think was a huge benefit. We were able to get to more teachers that just previously we weren't able to get to in those schools.
Okay.
And I certainly, from sitting in the meetings, some of those meetings over the last couple of years, just hearing some of the supports and how quickly sometimes they can identify and say, this really is not a course performance issue, this is a health issue, or this is a mental health issue, or this is a discipline issue. I feel like just observing that over the last couple of years, we've gotten that whole structure that Jason and his team has put together basically to run those meetings and identify students is very strong and something we did not have in place before, which I think is probably one of the biggest benefits that's come out of this grant.
Besides being a teacher, I've worked with a lot of different programs, processes, systems. I have never been involved in anything with as is exciting and as genuine and with the potential to produce the impact that this process has and this system. And as Dr. Royster said, this is our work. It's to improve every student. It's a very proactive process. It's not waiting around. We have the system in place so that we're not waiting around until a student fails, but we're being very proactive. And I can't think of any other process that is as student-centered as this process.
Well, most of this is of an informal nature. All the feedback that we've gotten from the partners has been very positive. And the most recent feedback we got from United Way Board, United Way Board's meeting last month was physically at Tanglewood, so they went through and saw what a team looks like. They went through and heard the nurse talk about, here's what we do, the nurse practitioner from GHS, here's how we address health issues. They heard reports and all those things directly from those people, and all the feedback from that group was very positive. So I think the seeds are planted there for the United Way to not only perhaps continue its support, but perhaps to help, again, to serve as a convening entity to try to expand this same project throughout the district, either through those same partners or maybe by leveraging other partners. Obviously we have a partnership in one case there with Greenville Health Systems delivering health services, but there are other providers. In fact, there are actually 2 other large providers of health care within Greenville County that may also be interested in becoming a part of similar services serving other schools within the district. So it's been a very positive feedback that we've received so far.
Okay, that's great to hear. When you look at the implementation plan, just to make sure that I understand the difference, when we look at this slide, the on-track, the schools that we're calling on-track United Way grant schools, that's these 4 that we're currently working with.
Correct.
So is it correct that the on-track GCS schools, they're getting the same supports from the district, they just don't have health or PEP or communities and schools necessarily assigned to them in the same way that these other schools do? Is that right?
Correct. And they may have other supports in place school by school. Some schools may have communities and schools that have chosen to partner with them in some way. Jason's person is Jennifer that does the training. My person on my team is Ellen Hampshire, who's our MTSS coordinator, and she and Jennifer work very closely together really to roll out and support those schools.
Okay.
For example, at one time, and I think this is still true, we had a pretty big presence of communities and schools at Greer Middle School. Mm-hmm. So that support's in place there. The other thing, and we didn't designate them in there, there's the potential to convert some of the things that are already being done in Title I schools to perhaps things that are being shown to be more effective and use Title I funds to provide those supports in the Title I schools. So there are a lot of things that I think can be pieced together over time to provide supports beyond simply the basic framework that the district has, either through expanding existing partnerships, seeking out new partners, looking at how we currently utilize Title I resources at the school level and at the district level. One of the ways, and I think there was discussion of that last month when we talked about test scores. We brought these academic teams, they're housed here, but they serve the Title I schools. That was how we ended up with sort of that initial coaching model by taking some district Title I investment and putting in those coaching teams to go out and assist the struggling Title I schools. And then we've used that same model with now obviously it's a much smaller staff coming out of our general fund to work with all the other schools. So there are a lot of ways to look at this, and I think that will be one of the first steps that we want to undertake as we expand. How can we expand the current partnerships? How can we engage other partners? How can we reutilize existing resources? And then what additional resources do we believe we need to recommend that you all put in place through the budget? And I think that will be the conversation going into and through the next year as we get better data, more data. Obviously, the first thing we need to do, how can we best utilize our existing resources, and then look towards additional resources.
Okay, but there's a possibility that the study that's coming out next month could identify some of those specific external interventions that are having an impact, and then would it be likely then that the district is going to come back and say, these things worked at these schools, these external interventions as a part of on-track work, and therefore they need to be embedded within these other schools? I mean, I just worry about we're studying one thing with the on-track schools, and then we're replicating part of it, but part of its success, I think we're going to find, is from these external partners.
Right, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't replicate all that we could replicate with existing resources.
Okay.
And then look at Because we may also find that all of those interventions aren't that effective.
That's right.
Some are more effective than others.
Okay.
Some of them, and one comes to mind, and Jeff may need to speak to it more so than I do, but some of the training of teachers can be more of it's not really a one and done, but some of it's an initial training that we can do which doesn't have a recurring budget impact, or it has a minimal one. You have to train new people as they come into the system. So some of the things can be approached in a different way than they were approached in the on-track grant. Some things we may not need to replicate, and other things we might can replicate with existing resources, like using are we most effectively using communities in schools at Greer Middle School based on what we've learned about using communities in schools in the on-track schools?
Okay.
So I think there's just I believe a lot of questions will come out of the initial data that will cause us to look more deeply at that and try to answer those questions so that we are making the best use of all the resources that we have to get the maximum return from them.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Morrison-Fair.
Okay, I'm going to go, I'm sorry, then Dr. O'Connor.
Thank you. I just want to say that for Dr. McCrary to say that this is the most exciting opportunity he's seen to reach students, that excites me because I know that you've been looking for those and paying attention, and I'm excited that we're on that verge, and to hear Dr. Royster talk about the fact that we're assisting in limited ways, and he's looking for ways to make it less limited since we know that it's working. That's great. I want to ask if you would say that is kind of tracking a portfolio, though, for these students from K through 12, or just each year. And maybe you've said it, but help me understand if this is a real way to look at a student from across their time with us and not just identifying where they are in a given year.
Okay.
Either one or both.
I'll let Jason speak to that as well,
Okay.
but what I would
Okay.
say just from experience of his school, that trend data that we have now in here that I can literally pull up at home or in my classroom, I mean, that was when I used to go to the records room and have to go back through hard records, which I couldn't do for every child. I mean, I did it for the kids that were struggling to try to figure out, was this a trend or was this something that just happened this year? When I can sit in my office and literally pull up the history of a child, and, you know, especially a child that may all of a sudden their grades have dropped significantly, but the last 7 years they have had A's and B's and now they have D's and F's. I mean, that's one of those red flags that you throw up and say, we got to intervene. There's something going on with that child that obviously is not just academic. There's something else going on. So when Jason kind of rolled that system out, I thought, gosh, from my own experience of teaching, how incredible of a system that would have been for me. I think I could have helped many more of my children that I just didn't have the time to look at 150 records traditionally over 8 years.
Okay.
Mr. McCoy's correct. We track longitudinally attendance, courses, course grades. While we track behavior, we limit that to only 1 year because, as the board directed a few years back, we want to make sure that with teachers, students are not seen as they come into the doors of the classroom on the first day of school as having any type of behavioral background. We want a clean slate. But no, the information does follow the student as long as as they remain in our schools. We have at least 6 years of data in most cases. Of course, the problem exists if we change test scores, those test scores will change, and so longitudinally it's difficult to make comparisons across years. But most of in fact, all of the data follows the student. It follows the school, so if a student changes schools multiple times within a year or across years, that information is known wherever the student currently attends.
Okay, so I guess if our goal is to be able to kind of individualize learning over time from those as they enter until they leave us, can we also use the system for those students who are not reflecting any concerns regarding behavior or attendance or grades, but as a way of tracking individual students with their unique interests, backgrounds, needs, et cetera, over time? Or is it only for those who are registering as having a problem?
I think the process that we first initiated, and by no means is GC Source complete, and I don't know that I could say that it would ever be complete, because the idea is we have disparate systems like all districts. We have a fitnessgram system, we have a transportation system, finance, HR. So those systems don't talk to the student information system, for example. With GC Source, as it's built out, we can pull in data from all these other systems. And so the information you're talking about, creating a profile of student interest, once we develop the tools, for example, survey data, we can then link the survey data to students, and that information can be drawn into GC Source, and so we can make decisions about student interest, potential classes. We can create graduate profiles to determine what are the gateway courses, and we have an idea of what those are, and we also have research to understand what those gateway courses are, but we can have empirical evidence based on our own data about what those are. Those are different phases as we expand to incorporate different systems into the background central storage unit.
Okay.
But as long as data is consistent and it goes into what's called our data warehouse, we can draw all types of data visuals and dashboards from that data.
That's great. And just when we were talking about the shape of being able to differentiate for the advanced students and those who are struggling, it seems that we would want to be able to use these systems even when a student isn't tripped into it because of a problem, but just because we're interested in their performance and success and engagement over the course of time with us, regardless of whether they're having a problem.
And some of that, like Jason said, we have currently, like the one example that brought to mind when you were talking about that was the Naviance, the interest of the students. I can certainly see when I'm looking at a child, whether they're struggling or not, I can see how as a teacher, I could play off that interest that, hey, you want to be whatever it is that you want to be when you're going to grow up, how that could also play into motivating that child academically, attendance-wise, whatever that happens to be. So sometimes, in some cases, we do have that data. Now it's just making all the complicated technical connections to make sure that data gets fed into the system in a usable way.
Okay, that's all very exciting. The last question about Drew Perry.
Without any objections, I would like to extend. I have one more speaker, so I would like to extend for about 10 minutes.
Okay. How many students is Drew Perry seeing these days? And do we feel, you may not have the answer, but I'll bring it up just to express the concern that if his interventions are helpful and working, which I presume they are, then do we have enough of that kind of connection and outreach with just one person in that role? So I guess I would ask Dr. Royster if you have any comment you'd like to make to that.
I don't have the number in front of me. It seems to me like the last time we looked at that, he might have been dealing with 270, 280 students, maybe close to 300. The short answer is no, we don't have enough, but it's got to be exactly the right person. And we are most fortunate that Drew he's exactly the right person. As we have opportunities to look at that going down the road, if we could identify either a position we could change over to that in our current staffing, or that we might include in the budget another position like that, I think that would be worthwhile.
Okay, thank you.
He certainly produced great results for us, but again, like with a lot of our other employees, a lot of that has to do with his skill, his ability, and his way of working with people.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. O'Connor, Mr. Southard.
Thank you. Jeff, looking at the whole program approach. Is MTSS for individuals or for groups or for both?
The multi-tiered system of support is really focused on the individual child. It's identifying those needs of the individual child so we can intervene with them.
Okay. Is this a preventive or is it a response system?
I would say this system, as it is paired with the GCS source on track, it's both. We are trying to prevent any issues going forward, but the students that are currently in issues, it's also a response to that intervention, that response to that issue to hopefully get the child back on track.
But we're trying to prevent through the individual and not
Correct.
through group.
Yes, and that's really where the GC source comes in. When we see those kids being flagged, they don't get flagged when we're in crisis mode. They get flagged well before crisis mode so that we can try to intervene with them ahead of time.
Did we seek a grant or did we see a grant and apply for it?
The grant was funded through United Way. I think that was a community approach. They came to us wanting to do an initiative, and they had money to through a grant to kind of help with that. So yes, it was a grant though that we've done for those 4 schools.
Okay. If we're not waiting around for a student to fail, as was told to us, then when we see something going on that we want to apply to improvement overall, where do we go for that?
Are you talking?
Let me give you an example.
Okay.
We've had where we said we needed to look at a problem that was a general problem. Since this involves only the individual student, if I'm looking for something that I think needs to be taken as a preventive for all students, that could be a drug program.
Sure.
It could be a sex education program.
Yes, sir.
It could be a driver program, which we've all have incorporated into our curriculum. If we come up with a program that we feel like we need to have the students become aware of it and maybe respond to it, how would we go about doing that?
It would be in the same way, whether it be a certain program, like you said, a drug alcohol abuse program, or whether it be an academic issue we identify with a single teacher. We would identify that through the right personnel. So either we would partner with a community person to come in and do that with us, or we would do that ourselves in-house. But yes, you're right. We would look at trend data, even though it's focused on the individual students. If we start seeing a trend across students, and certainly we're going to identify that problem and address it as a whole.
Just one example. If we have a problem with social media, the smartphone, the Facebook, more and more I hear that is becoming more and more of a problem for our young people. And if you look around this room, most people have got a phone in their hand, and I think when they're looking at that phone, they're not really paying attention to what's going on. So if I go into a classroom and I see that, and every time I come across my grandkids, the first thing they do is whip that out. So if I said that was a social media is really a problem, how would we go about confronting that? And I know it's very early in that. A lot of people don't consider that to even be a problem.
Right.
But I'm just using that as an example.
So if we were using that example, something we might identify as an example of some things we've done for that issue particularly is, as we seek some of that trend data, is we would go in and try to put in some supports for students. So for example, teaching students how to use the smartphone effectively for learning in the classrooms. We may offer workshops for parents, as many of our schools do, on the dangers of unsupervised access for elementary or middle school students. So again, we would have to look at that. That's a real big issue that I don't know that we ever have a solution for. But that's how we would normally tackle that. Is we would look at what supports outside or inside we could put in place to help curb that problem or issue.
I remember some time ago we had what was called character education.
Still
Is
do.
there anything that's replaced that?
We still have character education in our schools, yes. All of our schools do still do character education. We don't dictate what that program has to be, but they do have to have a character education program in place.
So it is required,
Yes, sir.
and that is in grades 1 through 12?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This whole child approach is certainly a good program,
Yes, sir.
but when I look at what we're doing for each individual child, I'm also want to make sure we're looking at groups of children and trends that are taking place so that we can become a part of that and maybe be preventive
Absolutely.
rather than responsive.
Agreed.
Thank you, Jeff. That's all I have. Thank you.
I will go back to Ms. Michelle Caldwell. Do you have additional questions? Okay. I have no, oh, I'm sorry. Ish.
I don't have a question, but if you'll think back, 2, maybe 3 years ago, and we went on when we were doing tours of our schools, and the board did a visit to Lakeview Middle School, and we actually went in a classroom, if you'll remember. We went into a classroom, and there was actually one of those meetings taking place. If you'll remember, there were maybe 15 or 20 people in that room, and they were discussing students on that weekly basis. There was a nurse in there discussing health. There was someone that, just in our process of the few minutes we stood in that room, that were actually doing what we see here. I know you talked about the tour that the United Way did, or the focus that they did go into Tanglewood, and we did that, and we walked in on that and we observed it, but we didn't at that time really realize what an impact, as we've heard this morning, that is having. And it might be something that the administration wants to look at, maybe the opportunity for the board to be able to see some of that in real time, and it to be able to observe that. So, but thank you very much. This is phenomenal, and I'll say, as Dr. O'Connor said, that I am most impressed that Jason used the strong words that he did to, because he's not one of those highly impressive types, but he's one of those more data-driven types. And to hear him use it, it's kind of like getting a graph. It's kind of like getting a graph in color from our finance people. So it's very exciting words to hear. 2 thumbs up. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Leventis Wells.
I got more, but I don't think Ms. Bush meant that.
You are very highly impressive. It's just when you are so impressed with the program and the kids, it makes us even feel that you're more so than you ever were before.
It takes a lot to impress him. I did not mean that.
You knew what that. Let's keep digging. Okay, thank you.
It takes a lot to impress him. That's what you mean.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your comments. Mr. McCoy, we certainly appreciate this presentation. We would expect no less from you and your team to be all things to all people. And so we appreciate the work that you've done and the presentation this morning. Thank you very much.
Now we have another
Impressive.
unimpressive.
Okay. We will now go to item 2.03, and I will turn it over to Dr. Jason McQuarrie. Excuse me, I'm sorry, Dr. Royster, do you have any comments?
Just a couple. This was a request from Dr. O'Connor and Ms. Bush and Ms. Leventis Wells to put back onto the agenda test score data so that you all might have additional opportunity beyond the workshop after the last committee, prior to the last board meeting, to ask additional questions you might have. So we have a really brief presentation, which primarily I've asked Dr. McCrary to share what are the really outstanding things that you should take from this. Well, we're doing really well, where the areas of key improvement needed. And then I believe that Mr. McCoy is also going to share with you some information that we think might be helpful as you look at reading levels of our students, because there's a whole lot of information out there about it that one might conclude that something was indicative of them reading on grade level when it's really not. So, Dr. McCreary?
Thank you, Dr. Royster. So, as you had stated and some others, we also look at trend data across groups as well. We look at it not only by strand, but by grade level, demographics, and other ways. I'm not going to go into great detail. You have the information. We had information presented at the workshop. I am going to hit some of the important points to keep in mind. For English Language Arts this past school year, and we're looking at 2017 data, third grade had the highest percentage of students meeting meets and exceeds. And if you recall, meets is the level of what the state's calling college readiness, although as we discussed, there's no empirical predictability about college readiness. So 51% of students meet or exceed expectations in third grade. The lowest percentage came from seventh grade, 40%. So you can see the range from 40 to 51%. Now what's different from a few years back, like I said at the workshop, is that these percentages were in the 80s prior to being cut to college and career readiness. So this is where most everyone is as a state. Mathematics, the highest, just like in ELA, is in third grade. 60% of students meeting and exceeding. Seventh grade has the lowest percentage of students meeting the college readiness at about 36%. One thing to keep in mind and highlight is that for Greenville County schools, we outperform the state as a whole. And again, we are part of that state percentage, so the gap is even bigger. But we outperform the state across all grade levels in ELA and in mathematics. For science and social studies, you see both the grade levels with the highest percentage. In science, we talked about this being the first year of the college-ready cut scores, and you can see that 6th and 7th grade have about 50% meeting expectation. Social studies has not yet been assigned college readiness standard cut score, and so you can see the difference in percentage achievement in social studies. So 4th grade had the highest percentage at 86%, 7th grade at 67%. Again, like ELA and math, Greenville County Schools outscores the state as a whole across all grade levels and in both subjects. When we look at EOC, of course, algebra and English have been set to college readiness. You can see the mean scale scores compared to the state. Again, a highlight is that across the board in each of these areas, Greenville County Schools outscores the state as a whole. You can also see on the far right, Greenville County Schools percent passing compared with the states where we outscore as well. We still have work to do, of course, in all these areas, and that's what our mission is, to improve upon 77%, for example, in biology, and increase the number of students and percentage of students passing. Our graduation rate has been a highlight across the years. You see continued improvement since 2012, and you can see in 2014, the reason our graduation rate is in yellow is because that's the year that we surpassed the state, and currently we're at 87.3% graduation rate. Our SAT is also above both the South Carolina total or composite and the nation. Of course, we had over 2,300 students take the test, which is a sizable number. It's almost half of our graduating class, and this is for our seniors. We had 11 high schools that scored at or above the national SAT average. ACT work keys, all students in the 11th grade were received and participated in work keys. You can see 3 years that we've been doing this for the district and the state, so you have those comparisons. The percentage NCRC, I've used that acronym before, but it's the National Certificate, I think, of National College Ready Certificate, or Career Ready Certificate. And that's given by ACT. Begins at the bronze level, so the percentage NCRC begins and includes bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. Across the nation, less than 1% receive a platinum, and so our district scores are indicative of the nation as a whole for ACT work keys. Platinum is extremely difficult, and platinum means that you receive some of the highest level scores across all three of the subtest areas. But you can see the percentage silver and above is really where we want students to be. We have many of our students are in silver for the district, 46.6% silver, 17.8% gold, 0.1% platinum. And you can see the comparison with the state. This is just a quick summary of ACT. You can see the year for 2016 and 17. You can see the state composites and subtests, and you can see the nation. For the state, we increased from 16 to 17, from 19.2 to 19.4. These are different cohorts. You can see we are also above the state composite, 19.4, compared to the state's 18.7 in 2017. And we are below the nation. The nation only tests about 64% of the total national senior population. So that's a comparison for Greenville County Schools, a 19.4 composite versus 21 composite. So when we move to testing all students, and when every state moves to testing all students, that composite score declines. So now I'll leave it with you for any questions that you might have. And I think Mr. McCoy also has some information to share.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCrary. Mrs. Roletta?
Thank you, Jason. This adds some valuable information. On SC Ready, SAT and ACT, when you give us these scores and you say Greenville County Schools scores better than the state, I'm assuming you leave our scores in with the state.
Yes, ma'am.
If you pull our scores out, the state would fall even further down, which would mean, we pull the state up.
Yeah, it would be
Is
larger.
that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's correct. Yes,
All right.
ma'am.
Is that true for SAT and the ACT scores?
For SAT, our scores are in the state scores. It's true for ACT. So for all of these where you see the state, our district scores have not been
Our scores
pulled
are
out.
calculated in. Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
good. So that makes us look even better, even though you can't
Right.
tell it. All right, thank you.
Mr. Ms. Caldwell?
I just have a request, Jason, on the data, that N percent, if y'all would put a key on there so we know what some of the things mean. What does N percent mean? I can't remember. What does that mean?
The number of students who take a test. So if you see N equals 2,300, that means that 2,300 student scores were recorded and creating a percentage or a composite.
Okay, if you could put a key on there. Also, I wanted to ask about the end of course for algebra. Is there a reason why we went down, the percentage went down from 215 to 216?
Oh, and yes. Well, from the previous year, 16, 17, from the year prior to that, so 2 years ago, which would be school year 15, 16, the primary reason we went down is because both Algebra 1 and English 1 were rescaled to college readiness. And so it became a more rigorous assessment in that in order to pass the test, you had to get and answer correctly more difficult questions.
I see that we went down in Algebra 1, but we went up in English 1. So both of them were to scale?
Both were scaled.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Excuse me, Dr. O'Connor?
Thank you. First, Dr. McCurry, I'd like to ask about how schools go about selecting the number of students who will take the SAT, because all the data that you have relates to the number of students taking the test. So when you're comparing school progress to prior years or to other schools or to the state or nation, a lot hinges on how that decision is made about which students will take the test. So my question is, is the uniformity there to allow that to be a meaningful comparison, and if so, how? So is it the same group type of students that are being asked or who are electing to take the test?
Yes.
And how do we know that uniformity is there?
I may not be the best to answer that question because I have anecdotal data, and that's why I talk to principals about what they're doing, or the assistant superintendents about what principals are doing. In the cases in which I have talked to principals, they provide an opportunity for any student who wishes to take the SAT. Many of our principals also have SAT come on site so that the student doesn't have to go to, say, Greenville Tech from Greer High School. The SAT is offered, for example, on a Saturday at Greer High School. So some high schools take advantage of that. Now, the SAT College Board would not want an SAC site established at every high school, but when our high school principals show interest and they can create regional, if you will, sites, it makes it a whole lot easier for students to get transportation. Since it's a voluntary test, students to get transportation on Saturday to go somewhere closer to home.
So with all those factors you named, in addition to the fact that some schools might be better at promoting and encouraging students to take the exam, would you agree that we have to be cautious when you're comparing school-to-school performance and so on, to just take note of the fact that it might not be a direct comparison? If one school happens to really be good at promoting more students to take the test, they might end up with a lower score, for example, but it wouldn't really have the meaning of how well they're doing instructionally at that school.
That's true,
that
and likewise, it wouldn't have a meaning for what necessarily the student body is interested in. Some may be more interested in some schools, a more significant population, in a direct career-based type.
The indicator to a high school principal as to the success of the SAT within their school is the data they get back, where it shows the test takers based on the courses they have taken. And that gives you the data as an individual principal. It gives you the data of the students who indicated they were interested in going to a four-year school, and they're enrolled in a program of studies that would lead them to get admission to a four-year school. So that's, as a high school principal for years, that's what I looked at with SAT. The ones that have taken the classes, because that's who we're preparing for. How did they do? Now, there's an indicator of the effectiveness of your instructional program within the school.
Okay.
One of the things that we want to look at the district, how does our percentage of students taking the SAT compare with our percentage of students who go to a four-year college? And our percentage is much higher than our students who go to a four-year college. The largest number of our students by group that pursue post-secondary, and I believe it's about 20% of our students, they actually go to Greenville Tech, the college transfer program, which doesn't necessarily require SAT, though most of those students take the SAT because they're going into a college transfer program. But for those that, of course, it's skewed a little bit now because everybody is taking the ACT. So that might cause your number to take the SAT to go down a little bit because everybody's going to have that second test score. Now, the state's changing that. The data you're looking at now is the result of the second year of everybody's going to take the ACT. The first year we did it, the comparison group was 11 other states. That's how many states, either 11 other or 11 total, gave the ACT to all their students. This year, I believe, in the numbers you're looking at now, it's about 7 states. It's gone down a little bit.
States move on, they come off.
So the best comparison that you can get when you're looking at a principal, as an individual school or as an individual high school principal, what percentage of our students are going on to college or saying they want to go on to college? How many are in those courses that lead them to be prepared to be accepted into college? And how did those students do on the SAT and the ACT because that's the marker for what kind of job you're doing with your college preparatory group in getting them ready for that next step. And of course, you want that to be available to any student who wants to go. And make sure that we're counseling students that if this is what you want to do, you need to take the SAT and or the ACT. And now this has changed a little bit with the change in the two tests, but used to be, you told students if you're a really good test taker, you need to take the SAT. And if you've got really good grades in your classes, you might want to take the ACT, because those were the two indicators of which test you might perform better on. So those are some of the things to look for.
Well, thank you for that, and that's one reason I'm really personally glad that we have an offering of the ACT to all of our students, because if we are measuring ourselves against a standard of career and college readiness, then we need some way to gauge how many of our students are actually prepared to be able to perform college level work. And the fact that we have one test that allows us to know that district-wide is helpful. And the answer was helpful about how to drill down to what actual instructional progress we're making by which courses they've had. But I'm interested to know that we're not just tracking people into, here are the courses you need to take if you want to go to college, but that we are actually giving everybody ample opportunity to be prepared, since all of our standards now are changing toward that. But anyway, that's that level testing. And I want to go back to the elementary for a moment and ask the question, when we are talking about 50% or more who are not meeting our ELA standards in third grade, let's say, and then we look at the math scores and we see that 23 of our schools, 50% or more, are not meeting. I'm trying to understand, and Dr. Royster alluded to it, how do we know which tests will show how we stand in relation to a national norm test, for example, or if we just looked at Fontes and Pinnell, we'd probably say we're doing a lot better than these results show because of the changes in testing and becoming more rigorous, or not being around long enough to know. But what are those test measures that we need to be looking at? Is it NAEP or MAP, or what do you think we can rely on to watch our progress over time on reading on grade level, for example, for our students?
Did you want to?
I think that if you would let Mr. McCoy do his presentation, it goes in part to answering your question.
I'm fine.
And then you might want to follow that up
with that.
with, would that be a good time to do that?
Unless other people want to do this.
Because it goes directly to the thing about Fontes and Pinnell and accuracy. And as he's bringing that up, one thing I would, and I'm doing this from memory, so Jason may need to correct me, the cut scores on these state tests were not set by psychometricians. They were not set by testing experts. They brought teachers together, a group of teachers from throughout the state, and they set, based on their professional experience, there's nothing wrong certainly with their professional experience, but again, they're not statisticians, they're not psychometricians. Psychometricians, I said that right. And I believe they set most of those cut scores at about 80%, between 75 and 80%.
That's correct.
So when you think about what's passing in a class to go from, to say that you successfully mastered the subject, it is not at 75 to 80%. So one of the reasons the percentages changed dramatically this year was by being recentered based on this decision of these groups that, well, somewhere between 75 and 80%, that's where they ought to be, to say that they've met
right,
or exceeded or whatever. So we believe that our better information about where our students stand, because they will compete obviously nationally, what national type information, to your point, do we have available to us that will say, well, here's how they look compared to other students in the nation on something that has numbers obviously drawn from throughout the nation. In the past, we've used MAP, and now with reading, we use Fontes and Pinnell. But that kind of leads into Mr. McCoy's presentation about specifically what does it mean when we say that a student is on grade level for reading in the third grade. And you can infer kind of from his answer what that means in other grade levels. So, Mr. McCoy?
So we have had Fontes and Pinnell in place for several years now, and we have used that even with MAP. Even when MAP was in place for all grade levels, Fontes and Pinnell is still the data we use for reading because MAP is a norm reference test. The national, and there's a couple national models. Fontes and Pinnell is very widely used around our state and nationally. And then there's a few other programs, of course, too, that people would determine to try to determine reading levels and on-grade level reading for children. This data, unfortunately for us, was not available district-wide until last year. Jason and his team and Bill Brown's team worked to create a system where teachers now log in individual student data so that now at the district level we have access to this data, which we did not have before. So what I'm sharing with you is while the teachers use this data individually and the schools use this data individually, we never had a district way to analyze it until now, which is what we've done this year. So I want to take back just briefly to spring of 2017. Spring of 2017, if you remember, this is who the state identified, 227 students in our district who were scored not met 1 on the ELA test, which is about 3.62% of our children in third grade. Now, that being said, the way the state does that, from what we've been told, is that it is not the entire ELA test because obviously you can't assess reading, all aspects of reading on a written test. Fluency, for example, is very hard to measure on a written test. It's an untimed test. So a child could take 10 minutes to read a problem and actually get the right answer to that problem, but we would have an issue if they're taking 10 minutes to read a sentence, fluency-wise. So it can't measure every aspect of the test. So it's pulling certain questions off that ELA test. It is not the entire ELA test, which is why you see a discrepancy of whatever the 50% not met was, versus here we're only saying 3.62%. So that's why, because they're only pulling off certain questions of that test to identify children who they say are not on grade level. This number, the 227, is not with the good cause exemptions applied, the ELL students. We know we've got students, many of those students, up to 50, 60% of those students in the 227 are ELL students who may only been in our country for a year or two. In many cases, those children can read. They just can't read in English, but they can read in a native language. So we would not consider them illiterate. We just got to catch them up and help them read in English. A lot of those kids would also be special education. So we talked about that before. So on that, the 127 students there that you see were the ones that really fell below where we would expect them to score in the Fontes and Pinnell. So when we pulled out 127 students of that 227, those students actually were also in Fontes and Pinnell below grade level. Those were students we were already targeting. I don't have an explanation for these students, to tell you the truth, other than it's a one-time test, which is why we have to be very careful with this. These students in the PMO here, those students actually are reading on grade level or above, and they scored not met 1 on the test. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. They could have just decided halfway through the test they didn't want to do it anymore, the grit piece. But I didn't look at all of those students, those 54 students. I pulled 7 of those students, and in all cases, all 7 of those students, I confirmed that they are absolutely reading. When you look at all the other measures, those students know how to read. So why they failed the test, we don't know, but it wasn't because they couldn't read. And again, that ELA test has a lot of other content on it as well. So when you look at this year, so let's fast forward to fall of 2017. We do the benchmarking twice a year for Fontes and Pinnell. We actually would do the benchmarking more additionally for students who are at risk in here. So we have identified, our method of identifying students who we believe are more in danger of reading is more aggressive than the state. So we have identified for this year that you can see there, those 12%, about 590 students who we would say are significantly below grade level. Fall the M level there, when we test the students in August, September, we would expect them to be at level M, which is where they left off in 2nd grade. So we expect them to be at level M or above, and you can kind of see we have some students reading on the college level, or way, way, way above, if you will. And we certainly have Sterling students in 3rd grade who are reading high levels. So M is where we would be. Between the red and green lines is where you would find students that we would monitor, but as I mentioned before, about I think it was a few months ago, Fontes and Pinnell is actually that all districts do this, broken out by month of where students could be. So from month to month, students are going to fall within that red and green line. I may get behind one month, but then I may catch up the next month. And so those students, those numbers change significantly even week to week or month to month. The kids that are below that red line are the ones we are most concerned about. They are off grade level, at least by one. In many cases, they are 2 grade levels or more off grade level. Now again, this is where you have to look at data as it's meant to be looked at. I can only look at these numbers and say, we got to figure out what's going on with those 31 kids that are at 0 level. In many cases, again, some of those students are ELL students who may have just gotten to the country, and they literally cannot read English, period. And so in some cases, those students would not be, as in other cases, we wouldn't put them in immediate reading intervention. We would put them in ESOL classes and programs to try to help them learn the language. So I want to make that point, and this is 3rd grade data. Okay, so we have this data for every grade, but this is the 3rd grade data because that's where the Read to Succeed law tells us who we have to retain in that. That is based on 5,111 students in the district and in 3rd grade in the district on that. So again, the schools would delve into, I think if I did my math correct, it was like 12 or so students on average per school that would be significantly below. Those are the students that the schools have in intensive intervention, and I've got those interventions here. For elementary, for example, who are below grade level, we may have, we obviously have classroom interventions. We just talked about MTSS. We would have reading interventionists in place. Particularly those ones that we're talking about in the red there, the significantly below that red line, those would be in reading intervention, those students. Or they may be in ESOL interventions. Again, if it's an ESOL language barrier issue, we would have them in ESOL, the intervention appropriate to them. And in some cases, many times those students are in special education and they're receiving special education services for a disability they have, and many times it may pertain to reading. Similarly, on a secondary level, we have the same kind of thing. Classroom interventions, obviously. ESOL interventions, again, for those students who just arrived in our country. And then we have several other interventions we do. On the special education side, we've got System 44, which is a very intensive intervention. Those are for students who are multiple grade levels below in special education for reading. And then we also have Read 180, which would be students who are behind, but it's not maybe as intensively behind as the students who are on System 44. So those are 2 reading programs that work in conjunction with a teacher to provide reading instruction. And then Language Live is what we use for the regular students, the non-special ed students, if you will, when they're struggling or off grade level or slightly off grade level with reading. We would put them in Language Live to try to remediate that at the higher levels. And then again, similarly, would be the special education services if a student is identified for special education on that. So those are some of the interventions that we would apply based on the data we're getting back out. Fontes and Pinnell for grades K through 5. And then obviously we have other data we have to look at for grades 6 through 12 for the students who we would put in System 44, Read 180, or Language Live. So this is the first time we've been able to present the Fontes and Pinnell data to you, like I said, because we did not have a way to collect it until we built it, the system. And so now this is what we monitor. The next administration will be done in the spring for Fontes and Pinnell, and we will do one intermediate development of that. And I should say Fontes and Pinnell, for those of you not familiar with it, it is a teacher-to-student test. In other words, it's not a test every child takes. It is me sitting with you individually, and I'm literally testing for all the fluency, the comprehension, all of that. So it's a very human connection. It's not a computerized test that they're taking multiple choice like SC Ready would be or MAP would be in there. Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions, additional questions? Ms. Wells?
So on the Fontes and Pinnell, when the teachers, to your point, they're sitting now 3 times a year, they're sitting with their students?
Two times for sure for all students, and other students get an additional intermediate as well.
So if they've been identified and targeted, then they'll do the additional. So when the teachers collect this data, are they doing it manually, or do they have a way do they have forms that they could do it on the computer electronically so that data gets?
They have
an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Okay, and so most of the time they sit with the spread. They're not having to then transfer the data, I guess is what I'm getting at? Do they have a way to just
They
fully
would-
electronically, whether it's an iPad or something else, enter the information real time as they sit with the child? Or are they having to then take that and transpose it into additional?
Yeah, they have to some teachers have come up with different ways to do it. It's up to the teacher preference. Many I still see do it paper, pencil, and that's fine. Many do electronic spreadsheets like Jason's talking about. The actual get the data to us, they actually do input that into a program. So it would say, Lisa Wells, and all I would do is input her letter of where she is currently. So it only takes them about a few minutes to do that because it's a very quick. They're not putting in a lot of information. The students' names are already on the screen for them. They're just putting in the score.
Okay. I think in helping teachers be more efficient and effective, in some of the conversations I've had with them, when we add things like this that they're doing, where they're doing an assessment that is so data rich, and then they're taking that information and then having to transfer it potentially a couple of different times, in from my paper and pencil into a spreadsheet, then to the district system. I think really thinking about how we could help them automate. At the city, we send workers out in the field with iPads. I'm sure the district probably does that too, so that your guy, when your tech's out there, he can enter exactly everything he needs right there on the iPad, and it goes up to the system. So I think if we think in terms of helping teachers with that, I just hear they're overwhelmed with the amount of data they are collecting on their students, and then how they're having to transfer that into different systems. So just to comment on if we could work on that a little bit, or think about that from a technology standpoint, I guess. I had questions on the data that Dr. McCrary presented. Since we've said the college and career cut scores, Dr. Royster explained that they're higher than maybe a psychometrician or someone else might have set those to. We've raised that standard. Wouldn't it be helpful to, instead of just comparing ourselves to the state, to compare ourselves to districts like ours? So we can't go outside of the state because these are state standards, but how do we compare to other districts that are like ours? Or how do we compare ourselves to the highest performing districts in the state? So they may be like us, they may not, but to me, I would like to see those two comparisons of the districts that are like ours in the state, and maybe those that don't have the same poverty index, because I know that's one thing you would look for. But just tell us what the highest performance districts are doing. Do y'all do that, and we just don't see that data?
Yeah, we do.
Dr. Royster sees it, Mr. McCoy, Mr. Mason, Dr. Mason as well. We have it. We look at it each year. There's no other district like Greenville County, but we still produce that information. We look at it from districts in the upstate. We look at it at the highest performing districts. Every time, the highest performing districts are always mostly homogeneous small districts. York 4 comes to mind, for example. We also, I provided information by looking at the school districts with the largest, who are the largest. We look at it that way as well. So we also have a matrix that we've been collecting data on. Last year was the first time. We're going to continue it this year, looking at where we fall across all the academic indicators. And overall, last year, Dr. Mason's not in here, but I believe we were ninth.
I think we were. I think I shared that with you all in the superintendent's report. It's a scientifically unscientific way to do it. I think because kind of the best we can. I think the way we did it is we took our rank and everybody else's rank in everything they get tested in, and put their place out of, I guess last year was 84 school districts.
About 82 to 84.
And so you were number 2 in this, you were number 28 in this, you were number 52 in this. You add all those numbers together, and like golf, whoever had the lowest score was won. And I think last year we were around 9 or 10. 12 last year. And I think we shared that with you later in the spring. So I'm going to guess this year we're probably somewhere not too far off of that. But we can certainly share that with you. It's just so difficult, particularly with in-state. Now, there's some other places we can look for some out-of-state stuff. But with the in-state, to look at that and give a comparison, because quite honestly, I'm going to pick on them. Fort Mill, they're going to be in the top, but they're not really comparable to anybody else. You know, you're talking about a very small district. You're talking about almost every student in that district coming from family with two parents with college education. The socioeconomic status is higher. So it's difficult. Even looking at Horry and Charleston, they're still about half our size. Their demographics may be a little closer to ours. So we run those and look at them for what it's worth. One of the things, and you mentioned that, was, and this doesn't have to do with the cut score set by the state, because you're talking about two different things. You got the cut score set by the state, which were done by groups of teachers. Then you've got this somewhat tenuous statistical relationship that the state is using to say you're college ready, and you mentioned that, and I think if I remember right, they're using, to whatever grades they've done, which I think they've maybe done the lower elementary grades, third, fourth, fifth, something like that, Jason, and use that score to predict their likelihood to score a 18 or higher on the ACT when they're a junior in high school. Wasn't that
Or 20 or higher.
was 20 or higher? And I think most of our state schools, in-state schools, not just state schools, but in-state schools, most of them, 17 or higher is their acceptance level. So you see, all these things you have to know when you start looking at the state throwing a label on something and saying they're college ready. Well, yeah, for what college? You know, they're college ready for top tier. Well, what about other colleges that are good programs, but maybe they're not the colleges that require a 20 or 21 or 22 on the ACT. So there are just so many variables in all that to try to, I said all that to say this, there's not this number you can put on us and other people that give you a good valid comparison that say we're better than all these people and we're not as good as these other folks.
Well,
though we try to do that as best we can.
Yeah, and I'm not looking for a comparison so I could say we're number 1 or number 50, although, you know, in the community you often hear about that national ranking that South Carolina has, but that's why it's important to me when we talk about Greenville County schools. I would make the case that we believe being a consolidated district of 76,000 students is a good thing, and it helps us leverage all the things we need academically, all the processes, all the people, those things. So we should compare ourselves to other districts like ours, that regardless of the size, to see how we're doing, so that we can make sure we set a bar and a target that is where we need it to be. And in the same way, it is why I believe it's really important for us to continue to have national measures for our students. So even though the state is saying, yeah, you don't have to give all the kids the ACT because they're not going to college, they're not taking those classes, I want to see how all our students are doing. And we can always parse out the data. If we say, okay, well, these kids really didn't take, you know, Dr. Royster, to your point about the SAT, when you were a principal, you looked at those scores and you said, okay, well, these are the kids that just took the SAT because mama told them to and they haven't taken the right classes. So that says one thing, and then you've got the ones that took the classes and you can see how they've done. Well, we could do the same thing with ACT data for our students, but if we don't do that, then we aren't looking at a national bar, and we're not really thinking about trying to prepare our students for a global society and a global education necessarily. It's pretty limiting. So I'd like to see the data with us compared to other districts and the high-performing districts and know what that looks like, because I think that tells us something. And I believe that we should still be doing some nationally normed tests for all our students. The SAT is very self-selecting because it does require that a student get up at 6:30 or 7 and go take a test on a Saturday. And so that data isn't really going to help us inform instructional decisions or tell us about how our academic program is working for all students to prepare them for college and career. So
And I think the downside of that, and it's just something to be reconciled and all that, is nor does giving a test to those who are unprepared or unmotivated to take it. That doesn't give you an indicator of the success of your instructional program either.
But, yeah, at least then you could use a score. I mean, again, you could say, all right, well, the ACT, to be college ready, they give you this certain mark that here's where you need to be for college ready. To your point, in South Carolina, you said it appears to be, say, 17, 19?
To be accepted in schools in South Carolina, I think the threshold is about 17. What the state has said in their accountability model, their current accountability model, is based on this score on this test you're taking in the third grade, we're predicting you to be a 20 or higher because we say you have to be a 20 to be college ready. Well, I don't know how you can say you have to be a 20 to be college ready when there are colleges that say we'll take you with 17 or 18.
Right.
And it's still all somewhat highly speculative. And one thing about when you start putting a test score out there, people don't take the time to parse out the data. They render their judgment and decision based on the test score.
Well, and I hear what you're saying, but we, as the the district and the board, we need to look at the data that we think is going to make sense for us to compare ourselves nationally and across the state. And if it means we put a data point out that people don't understand, I think our district's excellent at explaining those sorts of things. So, Ms. Morrison-Fair, I've got a couple other things.
Can I extend? Yes, I would like to extend with no objections for I have an additional speaker, 10 minutes.
Okay. So I'll kind of this will be a quick point on the work keys, so that we aren't going to require every student to take the ACT. And is that the same with the work keys?
SAT. Right now, work keys may or may not be our career-ready assessment for the spring. The state produced an RFP for a career-ready assessment in November, and we've not heard any information back.
Okay. So I guess one question I've always kind of wondered about the work keys is that we have very few students who score at the platinum level. But
Right.
the work keys is given to all of our students. So we've got our top performing AP, heavy, dual credit taking students, and yet we have very few. And I think if you look at the school results, there are only there are only 3 schools that have any students that receive the platinum designation on the work keys. So I guess I'm trying to understand that. Like how is the, I know it's about reading for information, I know it's work-based skills, but I guess the concern I would have is, I would think with our students that we have that are so advanced, same thing, you hear all the time, people say, well, God, these kids can't even make change. They can't count. So what can we sort of infer, or what kind of takeaways can we pull from the fact that we have so few students scoring at the highest level on work keys when we have so many advanced students that we allegedly are preparing for college and career?
I would first say that our percentage platinum mirrors the national
Okay, that's helpful.
percentage. And those, I think the ACT work key says that for those that are platinum percentage, that's basically the 99th percentile. And so we wouldn't expect a large percentage of students to fall in that category. And they don't across the nation.
Okay. All right, that's helpful on that one. Okay. That's it. Thank you, Ms. Morrison-Fair.
Thank you. Mr. Southard.
Dr. McCreary, in making comparisons, I took, for example, social studies, and I was looking at the elementary grades. If I look at the social studies for 2015, 2016, 2017, I look at the 4th and the 5th grade, looks like we did okay. But then when I get to the 6th and 7th and 8th grade, we seem to go down each year. Well, that gives me a little bit of idea about social studies in elementary school. But we're always comparing with other states, with other school districts, and we make all these comparisons. What I was interested in, I was looking at individual schools within our school district. And when I took the social studies, and I looked at the top school in social studies, I saw that if you take 2017, I saw where one school here did not meet was 18%, whereas the one that did meet in that school was 82%. So that was fine. But then I come down to the bottom school, and I see in this percent that 52% did not meet, and 48% did meet. My question is, at what point in time does a school become important or a problem? Well, how do we look at when we evaluate these schools? And how do we know when a school is not doing very well? When you compare the top school with the bottom school, then there could be a number of factors in regard to that. But if I go to that bottom school, how do I work with them? Because I see here in this school right here that when I looked at the social studies in 2016, we had 33% did not meet. And then when I look at it in 2017, 45% did not meet. How do we approach that school-wide, and how do we do that? I think we do these district comparisons for talking points. I'm looking at individual schools. How do we know when we look at individual schools, when do we say, well, hey, this is a problem, and this is becoming a real problem? I've compared 2 years here in this school right here, and we haven't done very well either year. So how do we approach that?
Well, we have 4 processes that I can think of off the top of my head to do that. One is at the individual student level, looking at test scores for students through GCS and early warning response system. The other is through teacher evaluations, which the principal talks individually and sets goals with teachers, particularly in middle and high school, those who only teach social studies. In elementary school, they look at their individual teacher level SC ready scores, and they have conversations with teacher. But that's autopsy data because it's already happened. So what they do is they look at periodic data from social studies throughout the school year. The other process, up one more level, is with our assistant superintendents meeting, using this data, using GC source data, talking to principals and using specific goals with principals to evaluate. And it may be based on not only ELA and math, but it could be social studies. And then finally, Mr. McCoy's team does quite a job with their focus schools, which he has discussed in here, and he might want to say something to that now.
I'll just remind you, Mr. Sutter, we talked about that a little bit in the board workshop. That focus school initiative is between my department and the assistant superintendents. And so every year in August, well, hopefully July, August, when that data comes back, that's what we're doing, is we're looking from year to year or trend data over a couple of years and making suggestions to say, I'm very concerned about this school. I think we need to intervene with this school, and we need to send in some additional assistance to them to help them with whatever area it happens to be.
When does that become a problem, Jill? If I'm looking at these schools, 2016, 2017, I'm looking at a particular subject. I'm looking at this school here, and I've got them all listed right here. At what point do I say this is a problem, and how many schools are involved in that? Or do I do that?
Well, we certainly do. We draw that line on the state average, kind of where the state average is for test scores, and that's part of the conversation assistant superintendents have when they go out to those schools. And remember, there's 4 subjects, and so a lot of times, Mr. Sutter, sometimes a school may fall at the bottom in all 4 subjects, and so we kind of have to pick and decide what are we going to focus on? Because we can't focus on everything, because we would certainly overwhelm and run everybody off at that point. But so we try to focus on what strategies can we put in place that are transferring across subjects. But anything that's below the state average and Greenville average is when the assistant superintendents are having conversations with them to say, I think you really need to look at the social studies scores or these science scores. You're not where you need to be. What supports can we put in place for you to do? So yes, sir, we look at that. I mean, we spend a lot of hours and hours and hours and hours in July and August looking at that data as soon as it comes back to identify where we can assist schools in helping them. So,
is there a way you could help me know when it's becoming a problem in a school? If I look here at these schools, Jeff, I'm just looking at all of them, and I'm just wondering now, when do we consider it to be a problem? Now, you say the state average, but I don't know what the state average is.
And we have that, and we certainly can draw that line on the sheet. The other thing, though, that we would look at, Mr. Southern Cross, is years over time. If a school is steadily increasing, even though they may be towards the bottom, but they're increasing 2 or 3 or 4% each year, we would say they're doing something right, and change doesn't happen in a year. But if we're seeing a decline, or they're at the bottom and they're staying steady, that again is when we're going to be. So there's several factors that we would say we're looking at, but you have to kind of look over time, and the challenge has been over time is that we have very little overtime data because the state tests have kept changing. And so, unfortunately, I don't have 5 years of social studies data that I can go back and look at to determine where schools are over trend.
What do you mean when you say over time?
So I would, if
is that got to be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years?
Well, ideally we would be looking at 3 to 5 years of trend data, but again, we don't have that many years. We don't have that many years. So right now, what we're doing is looking from year to year. So I think we have 3 years now, Jason, of stable social studies, if I remember correctly. Although social studies
standards changed.
Since the standards changed.
I can look at it from the 6th grade level, 7th grade level, 8th grade level.
Correct.
But then when I go down below that, I'm looking at it by school level. So you said, when I look at all these schools, elementary school, for example, in social studies, I can look at 2 years. Mm-hmm. And you said there's a point in time where we can draw a line and say, now, this is above, so they're okay, I would assume, just putting that in quotation marks.
Sure.
And the others are not. Let me ask you this. If I get to an individual school,
I'd like to extend for about 10 additional minutes.
that's fine.
All right?
When we get to the individual school, do principals look at individual teachers
Yes, sir.
and then discuss with them what's happening, what's taking place?
Yes, sir.
Now, I certainly don't want to know how that's going about, how that's doing. That's beyond me.
Sure.
But as long as I know that, not only are we looking at school-wide,
Yes, sir.
but we also are looking at classes
Absolutely.
in that regard.
Yes.
If I've got 4 classes of social studies in a school, and 2 are doing great and 2 of them are doing bad, then it may be, I don't know what factor, but
Correct.
it may be that we have got, this teacher is not doing very well for this particular reason.
Yes, sir. And that's really what the school principals are doing with their teachers of teams, particularly when that data comes back. The benefit now with the TE21 Mastery Connect is we literally are doing that regularly throughout the year, where we're sitting down and saying, here's some issues with maybe some teacher performance, that your class is not doing as well as some of the other classes in the schools. Let me support you, and how can I support you to bring you up to par instructionally?
Yeah, I look at the South Carolina pass rate, I look at the inter-course exams, and I look at the graduation rate, and I look at the SAT and ACT, but that is general overall.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering about particular schools. Is exactly how much are we focusing on individual schools?
And that's really all we do. I mean, we look at the data generally. Jason does specifically, and we get some general district data, and that's important for me and my staff for how we deliver professional development. But really, our day-to-day work, my day-to-day work, and the assistant superintendent's day-to-day work is all focused on individual schools, because that's what they do. I mean, that's 17 schools, however many they supervise. That's all they look at is that individual data piece.
Yeah. See, on that one, Jeff, we're comparing Greenville County schools with South Carolina.
Yes, sir.
All right. That's good if I want to say how we compare
Yes, sir.
to other school districts, but if I get down to individual schools, then I just hope that's where we are focusing
Yes, sir.
and saying, these schools are doing fine, But these schools right here, they're having problems.
Yes,
And so
sir.
I want to know exactly what kind of problem they're having and how we're approaching it.
Yes, sir. And that's the continuous improvement model to all this, and I think Dr. Royster alluded to this. Even though we would say there's some major issues with this test and the different tests and comparison, we take all this data and look at it and say, where can we improve? I mean, there is certainly room for us to improve across the board in all these, even though we're outperforming the state in all these areas. That would not be my goal. My goal would be that we would be at the top of the state, as is Dr. Royster's and all of it. So that's the measure we're working towards. We're working to be number one. And so we're constantly looking at other districts and what can we do that they put in place that's successful. Social studies, we looked at, as a matter of fact, a couple years ago, we looked at U.S. history. Some districts that were outperforming us in U.S. history, I sent my specialist down to look at that district, and she came back with some strategies, and over time, those social studies scores have improved. So we absolutely are looking at other districts, and even I do more national level of looking at what's successful nationally, but it's that continuous improvement. But we're absolutely looking at individual, and I can speak to say this, is superintendents who do a phenomenal job supporting the schools. That is what they do day in and day out every single day.
Yeah. Dr. Royster alludes to me quite often, and when he's alluding, that's when I'm beginning to pay more attention, because his alludes can be one way or another. Sometimes I don't know exactly where his allude is leading to.
He's very impressive.
But anyway, I really appreciate the information, and I'm glad that we are not just trying to see how we compare to other schools, but how our schools compare to one another. Sure. And when we have schools that are in trouble, how we help those schools. Thank you, that's all I have.
So to your point, if we go back to what we talked about earlier this morning, if we move every individual, it will fix all those issues.
I understand that. Well, no, I don't. But I appreciate the thought.
Okay, I have one last speaker, Dr. O'Connor.
Yes, I just wanted to ask one request as we close this item. I know that we've mentioned as a board several times that what our benchmarks are and how we'd like to compare ourselves, not just within the state, but to high-performing districts like ours or other high-performing districts inside and outside the state, but through nationally normed reference tests and those that we have to participate in, even though they keep changing. But would you please provide some data to us from some of those other high-performing districts as we prepare for the February workshop, where we will be looking at ways to set our own targets and measures for our school district and our strategic ed planning process, so that now that we've heard some of this rich discussion and some of the questions coming out of it, it would be great if we could have a little bit of direction of other districts or schools to look at for setting those targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor. And with that, we will close the instructional portion of the Committee of the Whole. I would like to turn it back over to the chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morrison-Fair. Really appreciate it. And now I will turn the agenda over to Mr. Lewis for the administration portion of our agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The one item in the administration portion of the agenda is item 3.01, an ad hoc committee to study choice and magnet programs. This request was made by Mr. Sailors. Mr. Sailors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just for a moment give everyone some background on why this is here and the steps we'd like to recommend moving forward. I think that as we concluded our board meeting in December and some of the conversation around two of the action items associated with that meeting, there was a consensus of the 12 of us that regardless of your personal opinion about magnet schools and choice, we needed to have a deeper dive or deeper conversation related to that particular topic. And so, of course, it was the holiday season and everybody wanted to check out, but there was a group of parents that were in the audience that evening that had some concerns about the conversations that we had, and over the holidays started talking among themselves, and the consensus or the perception at that point was that the district really didn't have a whole lot of faith or members of this board may not have had faith in magnet programs. And so one of the things I wanted to do in presenting this after talking to Mr. Lewis and Ms. Grayson, who had also had some additional input as well, was that putting this on the agenda and making it a focus of conversation would give the community an opportunity to understand that, yes, we are very supportive and concerned about the progress and the success of our magnet programs and school choice, but it would also establish a more defined opportunity for us as a board. And so that was the mindset behind this particular suggestion or recommendation. It was not, as some have indicated, that it was an opportunity to force an issue or circumvent the process. That's not the case. And if it did come across that way, it was unintentional. Now, all of that being said, I have had a chance to talk to Dr. O'Connor, and Mr. Lewis and Ms. Grayson and I have also conferred, and it's our understanding that Dr. O'Connor would like to include a more heavily focused conversation related to magnet and school choice programs as part of our ed plan conversation, which makes sense. And so with that in mind, it is my recommendation, Mr. Chairman, since this was already put on the agenda, we did not have an opportunity to pull it off. I would like to seek unanimous consent that this item be removed from consideration and that this topic be placed into our ed plan conversation as we progress through this coming year.
Thank you, Mr. Saylor. So without objection, with unanimous consent, we'll remove this item from the agenda. Any other discussion? Hearing none, that concludes the administration portion of this. Thank you. Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Saylors and all of those who have keen interest in this item, and I look forward to our board work going forward with it. The next item on our agenda is buildings and grounds, and I would like to turn that over, please, to Mr. Suddeth.
We began with item 4.01, Facilities Project Report, and doing that will be Mr. Mills. You're on, Mr. Mills.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Suddeth. I'm here to answer any questions on the Facilities Project Update for January 2018.
Who has a question?
Mr. Suddeth?
Oh, excuse me, Ms. Wells?
That's fine. So we have 4 capital projects going on right now. All of those on schedule, under budget, ready for instructional use, targeted completion date?
Let me run down the list. Rudolph Gordon is, we're on schedule there, and we are within budget. Emory Career Center, we're shooting for a completion date of January 24th there. That project does remain within budget. The Roper Mountain Science, Harrison Hall building revisions, we are on schedule, and that project remains within budget. In Fountain Inn High School, we're still in the initial programming phases of that school.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
But it remains on schedule.
It remains on schedule.
Of course.
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sutter.
Anyone else? Go ahead, ma'am.
Mr. Mills, can you give me an update on the Carolina High School amphitheater, the center?
Courtyard project?
Yeah.
It was our intention to have that project out for bids in December. We got some information back from the structural engineer evaluating the structure that we were trying to attach to the building there. There were some issues with the attachment to the the precast wall panels there. So we've got another design, and the engineer's reviewing that now for the attachment to the precast panels. I hope to have that out for bids before the end of the month. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. O'Connor?
No, sir. My hand is for the next item. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
I'm just trying to get your attention early in the matter. Sorry, a little too early.
I got a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Sailors.
Terry, what's the dead load weight on that if you're going to attach it to the building?
The issue is a potential snow load that could attach to the panel. I'm sorry, Mr. Sailors, I don't know the answer to your question, but I can.
But it's going to be a slight slope, so you don't have to worry about that much of a load weight on it?
The problem is that the panels are closure panels on the building, and they're not really meant to accept much of a load. We have to tie back to the structure, and the structure wasn't designed for this, so we're having to work around some issues associated with that.
Can you not install an external skeleton and just let it stand on its own?
That is one of the options, and we're looking at that also.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Then we'll move to 4.02. Yes, Dr. O'Connor?
Yes, Mr. Sudduth, I would like the record to show that I will be recusing myself from this item due to a work relationship that I have with one of the firms. I'll step out during this time. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Likewise, I'm going to be recusing myself. Although I have a firm that is not directly connected in this, I am going to be recusing myself from this discussion as well.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, the architect selection for the new Roper Mountain Science Center Environmental Science and Sustainability Building, who is going to focus on that?
Mr. Mills.
Mr. Mills?
Yes. The selection committee has reviewed all the firms. They've ranked them, and they have made a recommendation, and it's the Architectural Selection Committee's recommendation to approve firm A to design the new Roper Mountain Science Center Environmental Science and Sustainability Building, and I'll be glad to answer any questions about that.
Well, I guess first I'll put a motion on the floor, if that's appropriate. So that I move to approve the Architectural Selection Committee's recommendation to approve Firm A to design the new Roper Mountain Science Center Environmental Science and Sustainability Building.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Mrs. Mayor?
So, a couple things. On the facts and impact statement, we're saying that this building will include student-centered labs, open flexible display areas, and a kitchen with dining space. So originally, we didn't have anything in terms of helping with food options, dining options, et cetera, and then kind of at the end there, we said, okay, well, let's add a way to provide better services for meals when students come for field trips. And there was a little bit of conversation around a special ed program that I think Ms. Hogan had been involved with maybe, or maybe she just was, her and Mr. Sutters were aware of, where students were serving. And I guess I got the impression that was sort of ready-made. We were going to have a way for students to heat and serve, you'd use vendors, whatever, and bring that in. And so when I read this, it says we're going to have a kitchen with a dining space. So I guess I would like some clarity on
the original discussion, I guess, would simply include dining space, if you go back to the original discussion. And as they begin to have discussions internally about how we might accomplish that, Food and Nutrition Services indicated a need or desire for a test kitchen. And so they're examining the possibility of including a test kitchen as a part of that. The expense on that test kitchen would be on Food and Nutrition Services.
Okay. So I know we have funds available in fans to be spent on some items, but I guess I would still like for that to come back. I guess I see that as an additional capital, basically an additional capital add.
We believe that would be a change in the scope that we would bring back to you with that funding source.
Okay, good.
But, which is really indirectly related to the selection. We need to get
that's right.
firm on board.
This is in the facts and impact statement. I wanted to be, I have been remiss in mentioning things on other agenda items at the time I saw them, and I don't want it to bite me. So I'm just noting
Now,
that
dining
right
area
now.
doesn't change the scope, but
Right, that's right.
a test
A
kitchen,
test kitchen would. So that's the part, right.
particularly depending on if it's more than just a very small warming space, that expands the scope of the project.
Right, okay, great. And then the other thing would be, can you tell me a little bit about the ranking criteria? This is a very specialized space. It's not really like any of the other school buildings we've had designed, because it's a very different space. So what was the ranking criteria we used to make the determination on the selection?
I'll let Mr. Mills speak to that, but to your point, it is very specialized. But we've also done design work most recently with a number of other specialized spaces. When you think about Finney Fisher, think about the work that's going on at Fountain Inn High School. This is different, but all those are specialized spaces as well. So in the composition of his selection committees, I believe that Mr. Mills takes into account those perspectives that bring into the process the specialized knowledge necessary. Mr. Mills?
Mrs. Wells, I did not bring the actual grading sheet that had I think there were 10 different categories. I'm sorry, I didn't bring that with me, but I can speak to that. We had, well, let me speak to who was on the committee to start with. Michael Weeks, Thomas Riddle, Val Mosier, Kyle Rollins, Joe Urban, Brooke Smith, Ryan Tonneson, and Jamie Benton. So we had within district personnel, we had a wide variety of people. We had a good representation from Roper Mountain Science Center there also, and as I mentioned, Joe Urban's name was associated with the kitchen. A gentleman's name is Ryan Tonneson. You may not know Ryan. Ryan works on our energy management group. He's a mechanical engineer who has a degree and is specialized in sustainability itself, and works and does a tremendous amount of energy management projects and future projects and looking at things for us. So from a sustainability perspective, that was the reason he was put on the committee. But sustainability was a big part of it, innovative design, their background in environmental centers, museums, display exhibitions. That was part of what they were looking for. As always, consultants, the design team, familiarity with the architect and their familiarity with projects that are of like kind and scope. Those were the essential items. I'm sorry, I didn't. Okay. There were 10 categories. I think I touched on most of them.
Yeah.
We'll provide the scoring sheet to you prior to the board meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, that's it, Mr. Sudduth, for me.
Any other discussion? Caldwell, go ahead now.
Mr. Mills.
Before we proceed, without objection, we'll extend for 10 minutes. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mills, of the 28,800 square feet, how much of that is the dining space for which we approved this thing?
We're looking at about 4,800 square feet total for dining in the kitchen area.
That's all?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. The setting is only for about 300 students at a time.
Because I thought that was the reason why we approved this, was to have dining area for Roper Mountain Science Center, and I see these other things added. And it's only going to be 4,800 square feet?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Actually, the core project originally discussed and proposed didn't include a dining area. The dining area was added to the project later on.
That's correct.
Because there is a dining area there now. It's just not a very conducive one. And their calculations as far as size was based on the number of students that go through Roper Mountain on a daily basis, and the ability to schedule them during different times during what most people would think of as kind of a regular lunch period time. Mm-hmm. So their calculations based on in part on their capacity to how many students they can have on the mountain at one time.
You said the capacity would be 300 that they can do at a time?
They have about 600 students per day. They were going to have 2 settings of 300.
Okay.
It'll be pretty easy to go from 2 to 3 or even to 4.
Right.
When you think about the amount of time in the middle of the day. if they needed to
Okay.
do that.
All right.
So there's
Thank you,
room for
Ms.
growth there.
Thank you, Mr. Mills.
Mrs. Leventis Wells?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mills, could you give me an estimate of what the cost is per square foot?
The board approved $10 million for this project as a capital project, and we were looking at about $250 per square foot for the building itself.
And could you just tell me what stood out about Firm A opposed to all of the others that were involved?
I think we need to be very careful in answering that. We need to send you the scoring sheet and let
Okay,
you see
so-
the scores.
So, okay.
We don't need to speak to what stood out, because what could have stood out to an individual on that committee might have differed from individual to individual. What you will see in the scoring sheet would be how that translated into their score on the project.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mrs. Bush?
Just an overall general, I know last time we did this, you talked about how close, extremely close. Was that the situation this time? Was there a big discrepancy in like first, second, third ranked, or was there, I know we'll see that when we get the scores, but I know that last time you said it was a very close margin between first and second, and then I think it was a big gap between the third, fourth, fifth. So.
It was approaching 10%.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Between 1 and 2.
Between 1 and 2, yes,
Okay.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? If not, we have a motion and a second on the floor. If you approve, would you please indicate by saying aye?
Aye.
Opposed likewise? Motion carries. That concludes my portion of the program. I'll turn it back to Mrs. Bush.
We're trying to work out a designated lunch time so that we can come back for our workshop. So would 30 minutes be enough for the board to do this and others to get a bite? Okay. Could then we begin at...
Round it off to 12:15. Would that be okay? That's a little more than 30.
Yeah, 12:15. We will, are we going to meet back here, Terry? Or in conference room A? Meet in conference room A at 12:15. Thank you. Oh, I guess we will need to figure out an adjournment. Have a motion and a second to adjourn. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. And we are adjourned. Thank you.